I feel like when you hear the name James Charles in 2025, you kind of shudder and just think to yourself, hi sisters, hi sisters, hi sisters. You know, you kind of get the heebie-jeebies a little bit. And that's because James Charles has been in the social media zeitgeist spotlight for nearly a decade now. And in this time period, he has definitely been not short of controversy. And the terminology of controversy is definitely an understatement. From supposed beauty guru prodigy to internet drama magnate, James's journey is less of a rise and fall, but more like watching a car drive off a cliff, do 16 somersaults and then land without doing any damage whatsoever, and then the cliff collapses. Yes, his career it's definitely an interesting one, and that's definitely a way of putting it. It kind of feels like at this point in 2025, James has just exposed every single week. There's a new drama of the week. There's a new, possible criminal. There's a lot of bad stuff going on with this bloke, and because there's so much stuff going on, you just kind of forget the thing that happened last week, and you just move on to the next thing, and then the next thing happens, and you forget about that thing, and it just all kind of gets swept under the carpet. And yet, strangely, James in 2025 seemingly is one of the most adored, yet hated content creators in the social media space. And honestly, I blame TikTok for this. TikTok is just a plague, a mess. And yes, I use it regularly, but it's like an addiction that you just can't kick. You just want this thing to go away, but it's just there. It's kind of like gambling at this point. It's bad for you, but you just keep on scrolling. You're like, why am I doing this? I don't really know. And I think a lot of people out there, when it comes to James Charles, you're almost like, why am I still doing this? And I've been covering James now for around 6 years, I believe, maybe even 7 years, documenting his many controversies, downfalls, and also just in general how this guy has gotten away with absolutely everything. And by getting away with things, I don't mean, oh, he made a silly tweet, or oh, he had a little bit of drama beauty, or oh, he sold vitamin gummies, or something like that. I don't mean that. I mean, like, this bloke admitted to, actually messaging 16-year-old boys. He did this. This is a BBC News headline, which is still out there to this day. And yeah, it is considered old news at this point. Personally, I stand by the whole belief of probably shouldn't be old news, because it wasn't really that long ago. And even if it was long ago, I still would be very critical, just like I am towards any other celebrity out there, whether they're an actor, a director, an author. I think when you message a 16-year-old boy as a grown adult, it's kind of like, what are we doing here? But yes, in 2025, James is, if not more popular than he has ever been, mainly being popular on TikTok, getting a large amount of views and a large amount of love every single time he posts, and it's even gotten to the point now of where other influencers are happy to engage in creating content with him, and James right now seemingly is on top of the social media game. Well, until recently, because I'm sure a lot of you know at this point about a certain piece of drama and controversy that actually took place in early 2025. Because of May of this year, James became quote-unquote entwined in a viral domestic assault case after James was accused of protecting and enabling abuser and former TikToker Evan Johnson, and due to the claims, video after video were made about James involving serious allegations, the supposed protection of abusers, and basically every terrible thing you could possibly imagine. Well, aside from messaging 16-year-olds. But you see, the problem is with this situation is it's kind of come and gone, People have just moved on to the next thing, and that thing's now just under the many things that are under this big rug of James Charles controversies, and I'm a little bit like, hold up. Let's take a breather, let's take a pause, because some of the things that have happened and taken place in this controversy, I don't really think it's ever been resolved. I don't really think that people out there actually know what's really going on in this story. And today, what I really want to do is just go through this entire controversy, start to finish, and really explain what was going on in the James Charles, Kayla Malec, Evan Johnson controversy, drama, whatever mess you want to call it, because I feel like there's been so many lies, so many mistruths, and so much manipulation and calculative, if that even is a word, moves throughout this entire thing. And I've sat on the sidelines just watching it all, watching all the commentary and drama videos about this, and I've just been thinking, hold up, there's a lot of bollocks. And honestly, both sides. And I'm not going to be fence-sitting in this video, but what I am going to be doing is going through this entire timeline just to, as I said, work out what really happened in this story. But more importantly, work out how, yet again, somehow, James Charles managed to get away with everything. Because this is becoming a skill at this point that honestly I think I kind of admire, because this man manages, it's like Matrix, you know, he's like dodging bullets constantly. You're like, how are you dodging him? You've been dodging him for 7 years straight, but he's still doing it. And there's a skill, there's almost an art to it, and throughout this you're going to discover that art. So yeah, sit back and get ready for another journey into the insane world of James Charles. But before we do that, I do just quickly need to speak to you about today's sponsor. Me. Yes, there is no actual sponsor. I'm just here to humbly ask you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, because, you know, I want more subscribers, because it just... Honestly, I've got 1 million at this point. It's kind of greedy to even ask for more, but I'm just going to ask for more as it is. I would really appreciate it if you guys joined. And if you want to watch somebody with a microphone speak about something for like 2 hours straight, I'm your guy. You know, I've seen people complaining that commentary videos are now nothing more than a guy sat in the middle of the room with a microphone. But I'm like, guys, what do you expect? You expect me to like dance and stuff whilst telling the story? I'm not that guy, pal. I'm almost 30. I can't be doing that. I'm practically old. And if you're a 40-year-old watching this video right now, incredibly angry at me, sorry. Let's get into the story. Please subscribe, please like this video, and please comment your thoughts down below. Oh yeah, actually, one other plug. Sorry, I have a podcast called Over the Pond, and I really don't promote it in my videos enough. We talk about everything that we speak about on the main channel, and I would bloody love it if you came and subscribed. It's me and Obese the Beast, and I want you to come subscribe. So yeah, that's that. Let's get into the video. Now, this story all begins on April the 4th, 2025, when influencer Kayla Malec uploaded a 2-hour-long video titled, "He Doesn't Love You, Part 1. Now, in this video, Kayla goes through what she described as an extremely abusive relationship that began in the mid-stages of 2024 and lasted for 9 months with influencer and abuser Evan Johnson. Now, Kayla describes the horrible escalation of events in her relationship, stating that things such as Evan would tell her that he loved her, but on the same day he would then attempt to murder her. And overall, this story is extremely heartbreaking to listen to, and Kayla states that the reason that she is sharing the story now is because that she wants to help others, and she wants to help people get out of the same situation that she herself just went through. And yeah, this video is incredibly depressing to listen to, and you truly do just feel nothing but horrible and bad for Kayla Malec. Now, I'm not going to go through every single part of this video. In fact, I'm not going to really go through the video at all. All you really need to know is that, yes, this video details a lot of horrific events that happened between Kayla Malec and Evan Johnson. This video truly shocked the world, because some of the things spoken about here are absolutely beyond disturbing. But if you do want to go and watch the video and get the full story, I highly recommend you go to Kayla's channel and watch the video and come back, or watch it after this video. But overall, this video absolutely stunned everyone. And naturally, because of the serious allegations in the video, it led to a lot of serious action taking place afterwards. As on the 7th of April 2025, Evan Johnson was arrested for charge of domestic assault with a bond set at $30,000 and a violation of probation with a bond set at $30,000. And honestly, for me, when I saw this, it was a bit of a nice surprise to see the police actually take some action when it comes to an influencer doing something terrible. I have seen so many cases on my time on YouTube of the police just doing absolutely nothing when someone's come out and been like, yeah, this person did something horrific, they show evidence, they tell their story, and the police are like, we're not even going to investigate this. In fact, they don't even say anything, the case just gets dropped, and that's that. So to see something like this actually happen and some real action take place was honestly a breath of fresh air. And honestly, I would like to say that the story just ends there. You know, Kayla Malec starts to go on the kind of path to getting justice, but obviously you and I know that the story only was now beginning, and that's where I need to introduce another person in this story, and that is Zach Sellers, who garnered a lot of popularity on the 9th of April 2025 after posting 5 TikToks exposing Evan, where he claimed to be the former friend of Evan, and in general he went through and explained the manipulative nature of Evan and how for months or even years he was gaslit by Evan into being friends with him and ignoring all of the horrible signs that Evan would show. And yeah, in the first TikTok he basically explained how they became friends.
Hey guys, I know this is, a lot for me, to come out of my way, because I am not really big on social media. I'm more on the modeling, side, but I am coming on here on how I am involved with Evan, or how so was involved with Evan. Evan and I have always known of each other because we grew up in the same town here in Tennessee. But never hung out. Evan come back from LA, I believe, around January-ish, and I don't know exactly the date on when he came back, but he slid up on my Snapchat story and was like, hey bro, I really want to get into modeling. Can you help me out? I'm back in Tennessee for good, maybe going back to LA, not sure, but I really want to get into modeling. And I'm like, absolutely bro, like let's get it going, and I can do some coaching and we can get things going. Before all of this come about, I knew nothing about Evan and Kayla. I just knew that Evan and Kayla were in a relationship. So as soon as he got back, we hung out. We hung out multiple times and we talked about modeling. He started slowly opening up to me and telling me that him and Kayla were on a break. That's the reasoning that he's back here in Tennessee. And that he's just working on himself, and that also Kayla's working on herself.
Now yeah, at the starting of this, it seems very normal and actually kind of understandable, and throughout the TikTok when he goes on to speak even further, he starts to basically speak about how Evan decided to, as they progressed in their friendship, reveal more about why him as in Evan and Kayla took a break from their relationship, in which he then goes on to actually accuse Kayla of abuse.
It's not any of my business, to be in their relationship, so I tried to not, bring it up or, get involved in, their relationship. But not long after that, he started talking a lot about Kayla and was telling me, how abusive, Kayla was and all of this. So I started getting red flags right off the bat. And I was like, this guy's very cocky, he's very shady. I just felt unsettled when I was with him at any times.
So yeah, you kind of get the picture here. From what we can see, Evan Johnson was trying to get ahead of the allegations by making friends in other fields, knowing that he probably, after the allegations were going to come out, could not continue in the social media game due to, well yes, these incoming allegations most likely going to ruin his career. And this is something that happens quite a lot with influencers out there. When they know something is going to come out about them, you weirdly see them pivot and transition into another form of the industry that they really weren't familiar with beforehand. Now usually it's not going from being an influencer to being a model. Usually it's going from being your regular influencer to right-wing content. It's just something that I've kind of noticed happens over the years, of where someone will get exposed for something horrific and then they'll randomly just end up on some right-wing podcast where they're speaking about how they hate certain groups of people. Now obviously in this case it wasn't that, it was more just him trying to remain in a pretty familiar scene and probably just still get some form of income from, I guess, his supposed good looks. But now you're probably wondering, where does James Charles come into this story? Because obviously this whole video is about James Charles and this massive piece of drama and controversy. So why are we speaking about Zach Sellers, Kayla Malec, and Evan Johnson? Well, that actually takes us to clip number 3, where things start to get a little bit strange and ominous when Zach shows a clip of Evan at the time of this ongoing situation with Kayla Malec, talking about how he is in contact with a very big content creator. Now for a little bit of additional context here, before Kayla actually made her original video where she came out and explained the entire timeline of events with her and Evan Johnson, she actually jumped onto an Instagram live stream a little bit before that video and explained the situation in a bit of a more unscripted manner to do with Evan Johnson, and that is where the conversation originally begun about this abuse story.
I have to go to therapy for PTSD now. I can't look men in the eyes anymore.
Now, at that point of time, it was clear that there was a story developing between Kayla and Evan, and Kayla had very clearly made these serious allegations, and if you knew Kayla or were a friend of Kayla in the influencer space, you would definitely know what Kayla was talking about here and how serious this situation was. The situation was definitely not fully understood, but I think a lot of people out there knew that Evan Johnson had definitely done something terrible, and even if you were an acquaintance of Kayla Malec, I think you would definitely know the severity, or at least a vague idea of the severity of what was going on in this situation, and I just needed to add that context here, given for what we're about to next go through. Because yes, we now need to get into the conversation surrounding the big influencer that was supposedly in contact with Evan during all of this.
Okay guys, my buddy's in the car with me too. So Kayla went live earlier today, right? Immediately after the live, after saying how bad I was, after that, she immediately went and texted me and said, sorry, I had to do that. I'm texting another guy that's a big influencer, and he's like, she's literally doing that to get clout chasing.
Now, firstly, this guy is just a terrible, terrible human being, isn't he? But yeah, at first it seemed that Evan was going to try and defend himself in the public eye, and he did a pretty poor job of doing so, mainly stating things such as, oh well, she talked to me after accusing me of things, and I guess that makes everything okay.
And she texts me. Even after we broke up, she texts me and calls me. If I really abused her as bad as she's saying, why would she still text me? Why would she still do the things she's doing?
But obviously, me and you know that that isn't a valid argument. Someone can do terrible things to you and you can still have a conversation and speak to that person after those terrible things happened. Even if you are in that phase of telling everyone about those terrible things, there can be moments of where you will feel bad. It's a kind of confusing thing that happens with abuse, where people will understand that what's happened to them is wrong, yet at the same time feel bad about speaking up against the person that did the things to them. And it's clear here Evan was trying to weaponize that and use it against Kayla, but obviously the public were not having it. But another thing to note from that clip is the influencer that Evan mentioned. Because yeah, he said that he is in contact with an influencer who was pretty much supporting him, and even going as far to call Kayla a clout chaser. And of course, this live stream was clipped up, it was going around TikTok, and yes, it ended up in Zach Seller's TikTok that we just briefly went through. And a lot of people had the questions of, who is the influencer supposedly backing him? I want the name. Drop the name of this influencer. We need this influencer's name. And of course, because of this, there was a ton of rampant speculation about who this influencer could possibly be. Yes, all of the names that you could have possibly imagined came up of people saying it was someone like Jack Doherty or other people out there who I'm not really in the interest of naming. But overall, people were just really wondering who could possibly support somebody like this, given the sheer magnitude of what Kayla was saying in her original live stream. Because overall, I think a lot of people out there just wanted to make sure that they weren't supporting somebody who supports a terrible person like Evan, and of course, that led to people speculating. Which leads us to April the 10th, 2025, when Kayla Malec posted a second video about her story, and it was around 2 hours long, detailing once more the terrible nature of what Evan Johnson had done to her. And because of this, naturally the internet was even more enraged with Evan Johnson, wanting this man to pretty much never find peace ever again. And of course, with that outrage, it caused more people to speculate about the mysterious influencer who had not been named up until this point. Who could it possibly be, and how would they support somebody, given all of the things that Kayla was speaking about in her second video? How could anyone support the person that did that to her? And well, on the 13th of April 2025, it seemed that we actually got the answer to who this mysterious influencer was. Because yes, Zach Sellers was once again back on TikTok, and in this particular TikTok, he decided to name who the mysterious figure was. And yes, at this point of time, you've probably made a very obvious guess, or you probably just know who it was, because of course, it was James Charles.
Hi, sisters! Okay, I know you guys have been waiting for more parts and want the celebrity's name. I wanted to do it the right way. I wanted to reach out to Kayla, and Kayla hear from me first, just because this is her story, and I know deep down this is going to hurt. I gave you guys a hint at the beginning, but I'll go ahead and throw the name out there. It's the one and only James Charles. I know James is doing very, very well for himself, and a lot of young people look up to him, even my own nieces. I did not think that James was this type of person, but you just never know. You never know. There's a lot more to this story. This is just a brief little thing, me coming on here, just giving you guys the name, and there's going to be so much more coming out along this. But it's just, he needs to be held accountable, and he needs to be called out. If I was in this position and I done this, I think I deserve to be called out. And James, if you're watching this, you deserve to be called out, man. You know what that man done to her. You guys, you and Kayla were best friends. Like, you all have collabed together and all kinds of stuff. So, man, you know. And then when they break up, you hit up Evan, start talking to Evan. I was with Evan every single day, man, when he come back to Tennessee, when he left Kayla, when Kayla broke up with him. I know everything. I've seen all messages. I've seen all videos. I've seen a lot of proof. I personally have lots of receipts.
So yes, after all of the speculation, all of the anger, all of the people on social media just digging into things, trying to work out who this mysterious influencer was, it was James Charles. And of course, this accusation was pretty massive at the time, considering, well, James and Kayla, at least in the social media point of view, were seemingly friends. There was content of them together. They seemingly have hung out in the past, and there were videos still up at that moment of time of those two making content together. But despite that, Zach's accusation made it seem that, well, James seemingly was on the side of Evan Johnson, despite everything that was known about Evan at that moment in time. And people were naturally extremely angry at James for this, feeling betrayed, overall just confused at how someone could possibly support anyone like Evan Johnson. And things just started to get really, really bad for James. He started to get hate comments, he started to lose followers, and overall it was just a repeated cycle of every other time James Charles has lost followers. But things in this case were kind of getting to a point of almost like a Dramageddon style thing of where James was getting a tsunami of hatred, and things were only going to get worse. Because DMs were starting to leak of James appearing to reach out to Zach Sellers requesting for the video to be taken down. And yeah, I guess we'll go through the DMs now. Hello, I'm now just seeing these. I'm absolutely not on his side and would really, really appreciate it if you would leave me out of this. I only ever spoke to him because he manipulated me into thinking his situation was similar to what I went through. Oh, did he message 16-year-olds as well? So it was really a personal, sensitive topic that I had empathy for. As soon as I saw Kayla's video, I felt disgusting and awful, and I've stopped responding to him altogether. Now this is quite interesting considering we've gone over the fact that Kayla had put out a live stream even before that video, which James, in my personal opinion, given the fact that he was an influencer that had collaborated with Kayla, would have definitely seen that live stream and understood the context. Yet apparently he was manipulated. He's obviously manipulating and lying to everyone, according to James. I should have never spoken to him, but you were in the car with him, so I don't think it's fair you're making a video accusing me of being some monster when he had you convinced too. Now this could be considered a fair point that we will come back to. I'm sorry I didn't see your messages previously. I wish I would have sooner, but I appreciate that you reached out to warn me. I'm at Coachella right now, but if you want to talk later or today or tomorrow, I can make myself available. And he also went on to ask him to take down the TikToks about him. And obviously, in my opinion, it's never a good look to see an influencer reach out to somebody making a video on them stating, hey, could you possibly delete the video about me? These are my opinions. I was manipulated. Please, oh God, delete the video. It more seems that you don't actually care about the issue at hand, and it's more you're just trying to cover up the cracks and get around things and just overall protect your career, which, you know, it's not really a shock given James has done this about a million times at this point, but alas, this was James's statement, and overall, it really isn't that great in my humble opinion. Now, yes, there was one specific thing that he says in this message that could, be taken at face value as a pretty decent point, and that is the message of James basically stating that Zach was also hanging out with Evan, and that means, I guess, he can't call out James for doing the things that he has supposedly done. But there is a problem with what James is saying here, because James did word for word state that Zach did reach out to James in the past to warn him. He was even apologetic, stating that he was sorry that he didn't see these messages previously. So I think this does make this a bit of a different case, because it's clear that Zach, even in the past, did actually try to rectify the situation of being friends with Evan, and James was not in the same camp as that. James coincidentally didn't see these DMs, he didn't see Kayla's live stream, and he just coincidentally became friends with the person that his other friend was exposing for being a terrible person that did terrible things to them. I mean, there are a lot of coincidences here, and I'm not really sure I necessarily believe James. I mean, this is the same guy that claimed that he didn't know the age of the 16-year-olds that he was messaging, despite 16 being in one of the TikTok bios. I mean, there are always seemingly just a lot of coincidences when it comes to James Charles, but he does have a very young audience, ironically, and they do seem to believe everything that he says. But naturally, because of all of this situation started to divulge into something completely different than the original Kayla and Evan story. The Evan Johnson story had now seemingly also become the James Charlie story. And if I'm being honest with you, I remember at the time actually being quite irritated by this, and I even went onto my own podcast, Over the Pond, that you should definitely subscribe to, seemingly more just frustrated with the fact that more people are focusing on James Charles and, all of the stuff going on there rather than Evan Johnson and Kayla Malec. At this point of time in the timeline, the court case had not been concluded, nothing had been set in stone, and overall, I think I was just kind of annoyed that once again, James Charles had become the center of attention. But now, in hindsight, I feel like that argument really isn't fair, and it is actually an argument you will go to see James Charles use in the future to basically defend himself. And personally, I think this argument is silly, because the human brain can think about more than one thing at once. In fact, we can think about 1, 2, 3, or even 4 things at once. So in a situation where, yes, there isn't just one good side and one bad side, but there is a lot of nuance and middle ground, I think it is important that we focus on multiple things here. Evan Johnson can be a bad person at the same time as James Charles being a bad person, and I think it's important that we acknowledge both rather than just one of those things. And it's clear why James will go on to make these types of arguments in the future, mainly because in this story, things just progressively get worse and worse for him. Such as on the 15th of April, Zach Sellers came out with yet again another TikTok detailing the events of February 2025, where allegedly Evan flew out to LA to hang out with James Charles, which is pretty interesting considering February is the same month that Kayla came out with her live stream, and we've seen James actually say to Zach that the only reason that he defended Evan or helped out Evan or spoke to Evan was because he saw a similar situation. So it's clear that James knew that there was a situation ongoing here between Kayla and Evan Johnson, yet he decided to side with Evan Johnson, and supposedly, according to Zach Sellers, even got Evan to fly out to hang out with James. And I should just say, the next clip is very long, but I want to just play the full context here so you can kind of understand what was going on in the situation between James and Evan Johnson.
Hey guys, I'm back with part 2. There's so much information, so it's going to take some time, to catch on. I will be posting receipts to Snapchat and Instagram. So I'm going to start with Evan flew to California to see and stay with JC on February 28th. He stayed until March 3rd. He was supposed to come home on Sunday, but got talked into staying an extra night so they could have, one last night to, hang out and rest and just chill around the home. I know that just because I was in contact the whole time with Evan while he was in California, and I knew a lot of information at that time. I received a message from Evan while he was in California, because he was already like acting like he was like all like, you know, just the stuff pretty much, because who he was staying the night with multiple nights, and you know, whatever went on at JC's house. So the message, I do have everything, receipts, but the message that goes along with this was the lines of, this is coming from Evan, but since she has such a huge fan base, it's really hard to get my truth out. JC told me to be quiet as long as I can, no matter what. That come from Evan, and that was while he was in California. When he was in California, there was a lot of different phone calls, and I was getting Snapchats 24/7, so I was well aware of everything that happened in California while he was with JC. Your guys' biggest question is, how is JC involved with the Kayla and Evan situation? The reason that he is involved is because JC was already warned, told, and given information from Kayla the day that she broke up with Evan, that what he had done to her and how bad he was and how things got bad. There was a comment back to her, and it was along the lines, "Can I have him now?" Those lines were just, you know, I guess she thought that was a joke, because, you know, friends joke at that time. You know, Kayla and JC have been friends. They've done, you know, videos, collab together, and so on. So from that to him lying to Kayla, JC lying to Kayla and saying that he's not in contact with Evan, he doesn't speak to Evan, and a lot more stuff to that. I do have the receipts, but I'm not going to post the receipts on here. So the flight that Evan sent me, the boarding pass of him coming back from California, was he departed from Burbank, California airport at 1:06. So that's whenever he left. I picked Evan up once he got back to Nashville from that flight, and I'm sure it was a few hour flight. There's a lot more information that I do know, because I was with Evan, you know, prior of him going to California, and I know some reasons, and he was begged to come to California, actually, and I do know that by you guys know who. There's a lot of information that I'm gonna have to, you know, go in, and then once I'm talking about, you know, these things, and then once I post the receipts, you guys will understand. When Evan went to California, there was a phone call. I was on the phone actually with Evan, and there was a phone call that JC received from Kayla and said, hey, like around the lines, not word for word, but it was around the lines of, hey, I know this is a weird question, but by any chance is Evan with you? And JC comes back to Kayla and said, no, why would he be with me? During that time, they were sitting right beside each other. Literally right beside each other. So at that time, he was lying to his best friend that she trusted, and lied and said that, you know, he hasn't talked to him and he doesn't know anything why, you know, Evan's in LA.
Now, obviously, what is going on here is absolutely horrific. Based on what Zach was stating, not only was a friend betraying one of his friends, but he was also seemingly protecting the person that abused his friend. Now, there has been a lot of debate surrounding whether James and Kayla were best friends, good friends, or even friends or just acquaintances. But ultimately, I don't really think in this story that necessarily matters, because what we have seen is James clearly acknowledges and knows, or at least did know before Kayla even came out of her original 2-part series about Evan Johnson, that something serious took place between Kayla and Evan. And I'm gonna give a bit of a spoiler for later on in the timeline, but more and more DMs come out proving that yes, James absolutely knew that Evan had done some terrible things, yet James seemingly was hanging out with Evan despite knowing all of this. And this is all incredibly disturbing. The manipulation, the lies, the deceit, everything there, regardless of if they were friends or just acquaintances. I would not do this to somebody who I barely knew. If I knew somebody was walking down the street and they just came up to me and said to me, "Oh, Fraser, you know, my ex did these horrible things to me," I wouldn't then go out and seek their ex and fly out to them or get them to fly out to me and hang out with them because I personally related to their story. Even if I did feel like I, for some bizarre reason, personally related to them, I would not engage in conversation or friendship because, well, I've just been told that they have done something horrific. But also, I do have an honest question, and that is, well, why was Zach still friends with him after Kayla came out with her story on her live stream, especially considering in previous videos, Zach stated he started to be suspicious of Evan.
So I started getting red flags right off the bat, and I was like, this guy's very cocky, he's very shady. I just felt unsettled when I was with him.
And whilst I think James's situation here is far worse than Zach's, because Zach obviously knew Evan before all of this started to come out, and there was a, you know, pre-built friendship before these allegations, where it appears that James just more jumped into a friendship because of the allegations, you do have to question and wonder, why did you remain friends with this guy for so long? Because now he's making all of these TikToks, now he's making an outright series about everything to do with his friendship. To me, it doesn't really make much sense that you were suspicious of the guy, yet you still remain friends with him up until the point of what you were describing in the previous TikTok that we went through. I understand that being manipulated and gaslit is a very real thing, but based on Zach's words, he clearly at one point acknowledged, while still being friends with Evan, that Evan was a bad guy, or at least an incredibly suspicious guy. And then you add on top of that Kayla's live stream, things just don't necessarily add up. And that's what I meant earlier by stating that there is no good and bad side in this story. The only good side is Kayla, and the rest is a bunch of nuanced discussion that we need to have to truly work out who is the worst, who is the bad, and who is the why were you still around? Ultimately, as you can probably imagine, by the time we get to the end of this story, we're just gonna kind of dub multiple people in this story as bad, but with Zach, it is just more confusing. Because you were friends with the guy, you got suspicious of the guy, but you stayed friends with him till the final point, but now you're profiteering from a video series about the guy. And this kind of is my problem with LA influencers, or just honestly American influencers. I don't know what it is with that space, not like necessarily like people making fun vlogs or anything like that, but the space that are in the James Charles sphere. These people will like eat each other alive no matter what, and it kind of really represents itself in this story, and it's why I've taken a long time to make this video. And I understand the story has come and gone, but I really just wanted to have a grandiose scope on the entire thing to kind of just show you guys how awful influencers can be. Because yes, Zach is, you know, coming out with some fair points and fair stories that make sense, but it's like, mate, you could also be equally just said to be as bad as James in this story. And some people also started to notice some things in Zach's description to the TikToks that he was posting about James, where some people called out the fact that Zach tagged the People's magazine in the description of the videos, which, yeah, he actually did do that. And naturally, people were just getting progressively more frustrated because yes, there was a terrible person in Evan Johnson, but now there was James Charles, and now even the person telling the story about James in Zach was, you know, also seemingly just as guilty of some things that James was guilty of. Yet at the same time, we've seen James also admit that the things that he did was out of being manipulated by Evan, therefore admitting that yes, there was a friendship there, and this whole thing was becoming just a circle of just complete and utter, what would I describe as shithousery. And in an effort to further prove that James and Evan were hanging out in person, Zach starts to show text between Zach and Evan, where he was getting Evan to ask James questions as Evan was seemingly with James in person, which obviously is just so terrible. Regardless of all of the horrific stories that have come out about Evan, we have seen James hang out in videos, make content with Kayla Malec, and they were at least acquaintances. So to go and hang out with that person's ex-partner is obviously just a really shady and bad thing to do. But then when you add in all of the context surrounding Evan Johnson, it just makes it so much worse. Like, Kayla came out with her live stream explaining her previous relationship and how terrible it was, and you still decided to have that person fly out to you and hang out at your own home. That's weird, man. That's really, really weird. And naturally, because of these things coming out from Zach, the story was starting to get bigger and bigger, and overall, people were just starting to get completely enraged with James's alleged actions. He started to lose followers at an amount that he had not lost since the whole Bi Sister era in 2019, and yeah, things weren't looking good. But this was only the beginning, because now I need to introduce another person in this story, which of course is Be Better, who is a TikToker that pretty much covers very similar stuff to me. He has 1 million followers, and most of his things is more directed towards Hollywood related issues, and he has been directly implicated in this story. Because Be Better clearly saw what was developing in this story. He clearly saw that this could be another bi-sister sort of story in terms of magnitude, and he wanted to get himself involved by getting the true story out there. And because of that, on the 30th of April 2025, Be Better posted an interview with Zach titled Investigating James Charles. And this video is definitely an interesting one, and ultimately it does kind of flip the entire story, and if anything, this was actually a major win for James Charles, which I will explain why later on. Now, this entire video is basically a podcast setting where Be Better is interviewing Zach, and Zach is pretty much just telling his side of this story involving him, James Charles, and Evan Johnson. And throughout the podcast, Zach does reveal a lot of claims and allegations against James Charles, which did absolutely shock the world, which was quite interesting considering the magnitude of allegations that were already out there. Zach decided to come onto this long form podcast and just blow things out of the water. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know. There's something about this video that I just don't really like. I personally understand why Be Better made this video. He is a YouTuber that covers these types of topics. He is somebody that wanted to get the story out there. But there's something about Zach Sellers that when this was all coming out, I personally, and it seems a lot of people in the audience personally, did not like. It really did feel like, as I mentioned earlier, that Zach was trying to capitalize on this story. It really did seem that Zach wanted to launch a social media career off this story with Evan Johnson and James Charles, which obviously is a very difficult thing because we have seen at this point screenshots and receipts of James admitting to certain things, and we know that there definitely is a story and this isn't just baseless allegations. But the problem is, with Zach, in my opinion, trying to launch a social media career off of all of this, he's going to want to remain in the limelight for as long as possible. And it very much does kind of seem that this video or podcast was absolutely a case of that, where he's just coming out with some insane allegations and claims throughout the entire video, which honestly at the time were completely unsubstantiated, and even to this day, a large amount of claims really never got any evidence, any backing, or any support. And this is why Be Better got a lot of criticism for this podcast, because yeah, there was not much evidence to back much of what Zach was saying. And to me personally, it really did just kind of feel that Zach was just trying to say anything he possibly could to remain in the social media zeitgeist so people would talk about him, follow him, and overall, he would get some income coming into his bank accounts. To me, this whole podcast really just gave me bad vibes at the time, and honestly, it was a big reason to why I stayed away from this story for so long. Because yes, I think there is a very, very real story here, but I think sadly, due to people trying to capitalize on this story, it has led to so much misinformation getting out there, which overall, on the long term, has once again benefited James Charles, which we will get onto later in this video. Now, Zach does actually start this podcast in a bit of a defense of himself, stating that he was manipulated by Evan, and also, he really did not know the true extent of what was going on whilst he was friends with Evan Johnson.
Throughout the duration of your friendship with him, did you notice any red flags with him in the way that he behaved or anything looking back?
Looking back, believe it or not, I did not.
Now, sorry, I'm just looking at this in the editing process after I've recorded everything, and this is just another case right here of why I do not trust Zach, because in a previous clip when he first spoke about Evan Johnson and James Charles, he said this.
So I started getting red flags right off the bat, and I was like, this guy's very cocky, he's very shady. I just felt unsettled when I was with him.
Well, that's really interesting considering what he just said on this podcast.
Throughout the duration of your friendship with him, did you notice any red flags with him in the way that he behaved or anything looking back?
Looking back, believe it or not, I did not.
I just felt unsettled when I was with him.
So yeah, obviously things aren't really adding up here, and I think this all comes down to the fact that yes, there was clearly a story about James and Evan's friendship, but also at the same time, Zach knew that he also had a friendship with Evan Johnson, which went into the timeline of when he started to learn about Kayla and Evan, and a lot of people out there would probably, after seeing all of this, start to believe that, well, Zach is just as guilty as James in terms of remaining friends with him until it was no longer viable. And I think that's why he's contradicting himself here, because he really doesn't know how to get out of this whilst also continuing to capitalize on this story. But yeah, let's continue with this clip.
There was times that it was always constant conversations of him saying, Zach, can you give me advice? Like, what do I do if Kayla goes public? Like, what do I need to do exactly? That kind of raised the little red flags because that was a constant question 24/7, to me every single time we would hang out. And I asked him, I was like, what is the worst that happened between you guys so I can give you the correct advice? And the worst that he had, told me during that time was they were very verbal. Never, nothing was never physical. There was one time he said that for his protection, he had to hold her against the wall so she would not harm him. So at that time, when I say that, I was manipulated, I believed, Evan's side. I believed at one point I did not know Kayla. I believed that she was, in the wrong. She was the evil person.
Now, regardless of my criticism just now, I do also think that yes, obviously, it's much easier to be manipulated by Evan if you were not friends with Kayla, but at the same time, it does confuse me that he's saying this, but also said that he was uncomfortable with Evan at times. To me, this is a contradiction to what he's saying on this podcast. Yes, I think he was manipulated, but I also think over time he has tried to save face so he can continue running with this story and not face any criticism.
Me looking back now, I know the true side.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that he was worried about Kayla going public, because then the question is, what are you going public with? And if you didn't do anything wrong, why would you be worried about that?
Yes.
And then you mentioned also something about Reddit. He would tell you that not to check Reddit. Was that
Yes.
correct? Why did he say that?
So we would be in the car and he mentioned like, oh, I'm all over Reddit. So like that, I've never been like the type of person to get on Reddit. Like it was not even downloaded actually on my
It's a
phone.
scary place.
Yes, it's scary after I got on there. But
Yeah.
after he had dropped me off one night, I was like, something was telling me I need to get on Reddit and I'm curious just to look up Evan Johnson. I look up Evan Johnson. The first picture I saw was Evan holding, a vape, and it was posted on his story. And I believe the wording was something around, guys, did you guys know that Kayla was a whore? And that's the first thing that popped up on Reddit. And I was like, okay, so I don't know if that was joking, but you still don't joke that way. Like, especially with your girlfriend, that's someone you love. You're joking around that, and you keep going, it's deeper and deeper. So I started like, okay. And I asked him about the, scenarios, and he goes, there's just so many haters. Like, this is the reason why I did not want to be in the public eye. I did not want my relationship in the public eye. And at that time, I'm not always been in the public eye. I'm on the backside of the modeling industry. So I was like, okay, I understand that 100%.
So yeah, given the benefit of the doubt to Zach here, based on his own words, it does kind of feel that yes, he was manipulated by Evan Johnson. Now, James will obviously make the argument of, well, how is it any different with him? Well, with Zach, it is a bit different given the fact that Zach did not know Kayla before he became friends with Evan Johnson. So I definitely think it is a lot less worse. So whilst I do still hold a bit of criticism directed towards Zach for remaining friends of Evan despite claiming to be self-admitted suspicious of Evan, I do definitely think this is a lot less worse than James Charles's case. And now after this, Zach basically does spend the entire rest of the podcast solely speaking about James Charles, throwing plenty of allegations and claims out there like I mentioned earlier. And whilst there really was not much evidence provided in this podcast, it's kind of understandable to why so many people believed a lot of the claims Zach was making, because at this point of time, obviously James has a history, he has a pattern of doing terrible things. So obviously people didn't really put it past him to have done even more terrible things, such as supposedly saying that Evan Johnson had won in this situation for getting away from a quote-unquote psycho.
Were there any encounters where James was speaking specifically about Kayla?
Yes, there was. So that conversation that I actually, got in and interrupted, I now I have, caught on of why he was so like, do you trust him? Because they started picking up back on their conversation. And that's when James came back to Evan and was like, well, you didn't lose anything, Evan, out of this. If anything, you won. You got away from the psycho. She is the psychopath. Like, you are not the problem. She's the problem. She's been known to be the problem. She has been known to lie. She has been also known to make up complete fake stories just to get clout and have views. That's the only way, that's the only, that's the way she is today is how she's gotten by making up stories. I didn't know Kayla, so I was like, oh wow, like, I know I'm just in the passenger seat just listening and stuff. And then he goes, Evan, like, I'm here, like, for you no matter what, like, whatever you need, let me know, call me. He says, also, when you get home later tonight, FaceTime me. I want you to FaceTime me. And he says, if we need to sleep on the phone, we can. I'm here for you.
So yeah, the friendship between Evan and James, seemingly, according to Zach, was a pretty strong one. According to Zach, they were close, speaking every single day, supposedly, and things were just, according to Zach throughout this podcast, getting more and more friendly. It even got to the point of where Zach seemingly was implying and suggesting, or even just directly stating, that James and Evan were ongoing in a very, very explicit relationship, and it had even gotten to the point where James was the only thing Evan had.
There was another time that we were in the car, and when I say we were in the car, that's obviously we went to get in the car, go eat, go find something to do, go take some content for him and be done. And every single time, like, that was his go-to person. You got to think that Evan had me, but I'm not a celebrity. The only person he had after losing Kayla that he felt that he would be able to stay in the industry was James Charles. So he had to keep James Charles as close to him as possible. If not, then where would he end up? Nowhere, Like, he would not, there would be nothing out of that. But back to the next car time, there was a message back that James had sent to Evan and says, I have a big surprise for you when you get home. This is after we had left Nashville on the way back to Hendersonville, a local town that we actually are from and live in. So we get back, and little did James know that I actually went home with Evan. And when we get to Evan's house and in his room, Evan message him. They were messaging the whole time anyways. And he lets James know, is like, hey, I'm like 5 minutes away from home. Okay, so letting James know, get ready and stuff. I don't know what, I was like confused by the surprise. Well, we get to in Evan's room, and then he notices like Evan takes a picture of himself and is like, obviously him in his room. And the next picture was James bent over on his bed with his up in the air and was showing his, and didn't say anything in the first picture. Then messages like, how do you like that, daddy?
Now, if what is being stated in this clip here is true, obviously this is the ultimate betrayal of Kayla Malec. According to Zach, Evan Johnson and James Charles were engaging in an extremely explicit relationship. And in other parts of this podcast, Zach does describe more about James's explicit relationship with Evan and keeps on reiterating that it was definitely more than just a friendship. But obviously, there was no proof of this. Zach wasn't coming on here and showing evidence of, James and Evan engaging in anything possibly explicit. And Be Better even did ask him, well, where's the proof?
As soon as I saw Kayla's video, I felt disgusting and awful, and I've stopped responding to him altogether. Now, to me, that's interesting because we've obviously had private conversations. We've spoken extensively to Kayla.
Yes.
And the biggest thing that I wanted to understand before I was deciding if I really wanted to do a deep dive and look into this case is there definitive proof that James Charles knew that Evan Johnson was an abuser and then pursued a sexual relationship with him afterward? Because that's the most concerning aspect of it all. And from speaking to Kayla, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was a situation where James Charles had wanted Evan Johnson and Kayla Malec to do a promotional material for his painted company for Valentine's Day, kind of having them be a couple of some kind, probably for his blush launch or something like that. Looking back, that's obviously a little bit creepy because knowing that the entire time he was interacting with them, he wanted Kayla out of the picture and he's really the one that wanted Evan, that's already a little bit bizarre.
Yes.
So then James had reached out to Kayla and said something along the lines of, are we still good to do this Valentine's Day project? And Kayla said, oh, so funny. Actually, we literally just broke up yesterday. Evan did some of the worst things a human being could ever do to someone to me, abused me, explained the situation. And then James said something.
So James came back after she said that and was like, can I have him now? Kayla thought he was completely joking. Like, literally thought her best friend, which is, James at the time, was just joking with her, saying that.
But that's already like a really inappropriate joke.
Yeah, that's...
Even if it is, but little did we know he wasn't joking at all.
No.
Now again, this reiterates a problem that I had with this podcast earlier of there being really no forms of evidence to necessarily back anything here. Because yes, obviously, if the things that he was saying were to be true, then obviously they would be absolutely wild and ultimately would make James look awful, but there were no real screenshots of proof of all of the things that he was stating. Yes, there were some screenshots where James admits we are not in contact. I stopped responding right after Kayla's video when he asked for advice. I originally did tell him he shouldn't respond because he's a dumbass and would never be able to defend himself. Clearly now we know why. And this is what kind of annoys me with this podcast, because yes, we actually had a pretty damning screenshot given to us, but with a large amount of other damning allegations, there is just no screenshots whatsoever, and we're expected to believe the word of Zach Sellers. But actually looking at this screenshot for a second, obviously it does beg the question to James of why would you even be in contact with Evan Johnson knowing these allegations are coming from a friend of yours, or at least acquaintance of yours? That is incredibly weird. And of course, at this point of the timeline now, we are getting a few more screenshots which only make James look even more guilty of the things that he's being accused of. And because of this, people were starting to believe some of the substantiated claims that Zach Sellers was making, because ultimately all we had really seen at this point of time were things against James Charles, and naturally with the way social media works, they were not willing to wait for James's word, and they were immediately going after James. But honestly, in this case, I could kind of understand it, because at the end of the day, all of these screenshots do really indicate that, well, there at least was a friendship between Evan Johnson and James Charles after the allegations started to briefly come out. But it doesn't help that Zach went on in this podcast to make claims about the possibility of there being an 18+ R-rated explicit videotape of James and Evan existing. And yes, obviously, he can't provide the evidence of that if that was a thing that actually existed, but at the end of the day, I really don't understand why he would even come on here and make these claims, because all he's really doing here is giving firepower to James in the future. And his whole thing is kind of confusing to me, because he has provided screenshots at some points, and even in some cases where I've been mad at him for not providing screenshots in the future, the certain things that he has claimed have actually come true, which you will find out later on in the video. But there were so many claims in this video with no backing and no evidence in the future that it just makes this whole thing so much more unbelievable. And that kind of takes us back to something that I was mentioning at the beginning of this video, of James being an absolute master of getting away with things. Because in the past, yes, James has been called out for messaging 16-year-olds, and you might be wondering, well, how did he get away with that? Well, it was because during the midst of a very real story, a large amount of fake stories came out against James, and he used those stories to his advantage. And because of those fake stories coming out, it allowed a lot of people to say, well, maybe the real stories about James aren't real, because if those fake ones exist, why would the real ones be real? And the fake stories is something that James has loved to bring up in the past, and other journalists have brought up in the past in previous videos that I've gone through, where journalists have been like, there was an absolute plethora of fake stories out there about James Charles, and it's like, that's great, but there still is a very, very real story here about James Charles, and the same can be said in this story with James. I don't understand the need to make claims that have no evidence backing them, even if they possibly were real and Zach just didn't have the proof to prove that. I just don't think you should come out with those claims, because obviously this is social media, and if you don't have receipts or evidence to back your claims, then the person you're making these claims about can just go and speak about all of the claims, stating that, well, you've spread so many lies and so much misinformation, why would we trust you about any of the other possible true things in the screenshots that you actually have provided? But now, in fairness to Be Better and Zach Sellers, the podcast actually did go down pretty well. Most people were basically just thankful that Be Better brought more attention to a horrible situation and alerted the world that yes, James seemingly was at least slightly complicit in standing by Evan Johnson, even if it was just a short period of time. But shockingly enough, this was not the end of the story, after Zach came out with even more TikToks after this interview claiming that James was now trying to silence him.
Guys, okay, some crazy stuff's happening now. So I wanted to get on here and talk to you guys. My modeling agency received a crazy, insane email. Let's just say this email is from James Charles's team. They are now going after my career that I have worked so hard for just because I am speaking the absolute truth. They are now trying to silence me completely. They do not want me to speak another word about the situation. Let me just tell you what they kind of said. So, it said, apologies for the Friday evening email. My firm represents James Charles Dickinson, and I would love to have a frank discussion with you at your earliest convenience regarding your client, Zach Sellers. Is this not insane to you guys? James, what are you doing, bro? Like, you know what you did, and you know what I'm doing is speaking facts. Why are you having them try to come to me and shut me up? If this is what you want to do, take your legal action.
Now, when this TikTok first came out, I think a lot of people naturally took Zach's side, seeing an influencer with a lot more money, a lot more followers, and a lot more power try to silence somebody in the way that Zach is describing here. Obviously, this is something that I've spoken against for a very long time on my YouTube channel, but honestly, in this scenario, I can kind of understand why James would go legal with this situation. Because as I've been mentioning throughout this section of the video, on the Be Better podcast, there were a large amount of claims made, but there was just not sufficient evidence to prove anything that they were saying, but people in the comment section were taking it as absolute fact, going around TikTok, spreading what Zach had been saying as absolute truth. And even in this response, Zach still reiterates that what he was saying was nothing but the truth. Yet there was not enough evidence to back every single claim that he had made, so naturally I can kind of get why James would go legal in this situation. I don't agree with it, but I can see from his perspective why he would do this. And honestly, I don't really understand what Zach or even Be Better in this situation really thought was going to happen. They were going up against a multi-millionaire TikToker who runs multiple businesses, has 20 plus million followers on social media, has an absolute business empire, and they started making very, very serious claims. Well, Zach started making very, very serious claims against him, and they did not provide enough evidence. Obviously, he was going to sue you. And at this point of time, a lot of people were starting to point that out, and some were even getting frustrated with Zach, claiming that he was actually just trying to make Kayla's story all about him and try to make a career off it. And to be honest, I can kind of get why people were making this argument. Up until this point, Kayla had not actually said anything about this whole story to do with James Charles and Zach Sellers, and pretty much right now, it did just seem that the whole thing was Be Better and Zach Sellers going up against James Charles without Kayla actually saying anything. So yeah, I guess a lot of people were wondering, well, what does Kayla think about all of this? Is this somebody trying to hijack her story and make it all about themselves to launch a career off it? Or is this someone actually just trying to get a real story out there? Well, Kayla, amidst all of the drama just before her court hearing, released this TikTok.
This lineup of events has got to be just like, I don't even know. Like this has to be like a test of like patience. Like, Kayla, you have to bite your tongue until next week. How? Can you do it? Like, nobody understands how hard it is to like just sit here and scroll on my For You page and not say anything yet. Anyways, court's in 2 days. What the is going, like, what is life, you know? Like, what the so much that I have to say and I have to wait. Like, was me getting assaulted not enough? Thank you to whoever is up above.
So yes, it's very obvious that Kayla was very frustrated with the situation and obviously had a lot that she wanted to say, but could not do so due to the ongoing legal situation, which in my opinion makes perfect sense. But at this point of time, the public opinion was very much against James Charles. While some people out there were getting frustrated with Zach Sellers and could clearly see that this guy was trying to use the situation to his benefit, ultimately, I think there had been enough to show that James Charles had definitely done something wrong in this situation, and naturally, people now wanted a response or rebuttal from James, in which he actually gave. Because James went straight to his Instagram story, outright denying that he supports Evan Johnson, and that he hopes Kayla gets justice, but that he will not be responding to this until the hearing is over. And to be honest with you, I actually can't really criticize what he's saying here. In the past, I was frustrated that this story was taking over the main story involving Kayla and Evan, and yeah, that's kind of why I actually didn't speak about it for a very long time. But as I said earlier, this should not be an outright defense of James's potential actions, and it should just be more a bit of a, okay, we'll wait until the court hearing is over and then we'll deal with the other stuff. And of course that eventually happened after the 8th of May, where Kayla Malec went to her social media to reveal that she had won her case against Evan Johnson. Now, honestly, this is still to this day an amazing thing to see. I feel like there's been so many cases where influencers do horrific things, commit awful crimes, and just somehow seem to get away with, everything. I mean, this is a kind of a bit of an example of that, kind of, allegedly. Like, I do find it crazy that James managed to get away with the things that he has done in the past scot-free and consequence-free. Like, there's nothing that really has impacted this guy on a major basis. He still has a massive platform, he still is a millionaire, he's still got his mansion, and he's still doing great. So it was actually surprisingly nice to see someone actually get their justice up against another influencer. But naturally, this did get a lot of people speaking about the other side to this story. Because yes, now we had got the conclusion to the Evan Johnson Kayla Malec story. Now we had the side story to deal with involving James Charles, because obviously in his previous Instagram story he stated that yes, he was going to respond after this was all concluded, and now it was concluded. Which of course leads us to May the 7th, 2025, when James Charles made a 10-minute TikTok responding to all of the stuff that had been circulated about him, all of the allegations, all of the claims, and in this video, James aimed to clear everything up and make things good for him once again. And honestly, I have, shock surprise, a lot of problems with this response. But actually, this response did really, really well for James, which honestly doesn't really surprise me given the average age of a TikTok user that follows James Charles. But yes, we're going to go through this response now and analyze my issues and problems with it, but also some cases of where James does make a fair point, here and there.
I do not support Evan Johnson in any way, shape, or form, and let me make that fucking clear. I don't support him, I don't support violence against women, and I sure as hell do not support the disgusting, deplorable, violent, heinous acts that he committed against Kayla Malec behind closed doors. I really hope and pray that when this goes to court this week, Kayla gets justice for what that man put her through. At the same time, the videos that I'm currently seeing all over my For You page are disturbing to me. This is not TikTok tea and drama for everyone else's entertainment. This is real people dealing with some really serious shit. The conversation has completely shifted focus away from Kayla Malec and how she was brave enough to speak out about what she went through to how James Charles involved, the downfall, By Sister 2.0, where's the apology video? It's distracting from the actual issue at hand.
Now, as I've mentioned throughout this video so far, I actually held this same opinion that James has here when I was first looking into this story of I was getting increasingly concerned that this story surrounding Kayla Malec and Evan Johnson was now becoming about James Charles. But I've actually now retracted that opinion because I've been watching quite a lot of coverage about this, and it's mainly come down to the fact that I've, had people say that, well, you can focus on more than one thing, Obviously, there is a main story point here, but that doesn't mean we should take away from the side stories and the side aspects of what actually took place during the story, and it doesn't mean that we should use someone's traumatic events as a way to excuse James Charles doing terrible things. Because up until this point in the timeline, everyone had seen quite a few screenshots. For example, the screenshots of James saying that he told Evan Johnson not to reply, or admitting to associating with Evan Johnson, yes, out of manipulation, but why would you even be associating with the guy in the first place to get in a position of being manipulated? This guy was the ex of your former friend or former associate, your work partner, and they also had gone on to live stream speaking about their horrific experiences in their previous relationship, and yet you still engaged in a friendship or whatever with Evan Johnson. So actually, no, I don't agree with what James is saying here, and I think what he's actually doing here is manipulating the audience into using Kayla's trauma as a way to excuse his actions and bury it under the carpet. Because that is something James loves to do, and something that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, of where James will do certain tactics and do certain things and act in certain ways and say certain things and use certain deflections as a way to just throw things under the carpet. For example, yes, this situation right here. As I mentioned earlier, the big defense used for James in the past has been, oh, there were tons of false allegations out there about him, which is true, but it ultimately doesn't take away from the fact that there was a real situation that James admitted to, but for some reason, due to the absolute plethora of false allegations, it all kind of mixed into something that just got swept under the rug because not many people really knew what James had actually done. And this is another example of James using these calculative, manipulative excuses. Another commentary YouTuber, Angelica Oles, actually made a really good video about this, with a video even titled, "If you believe James Charles's apology, you might be stupid." And initially, when I first watched the video on my podcast Over the Pond, I actually disagreed with Angelica's take. But as you go further in, you will see why she holds this opinion. And a thing that she consistently brings up throughout the video is, yes, you can focus on more than one thing, even two things or three things. And the only reason James seems to be suggesting that you can't do that is because he does not want you to talk about his supposed alleged actions. But then after this, James starts to make even more excuses around the big reasons why he didn't want to talk about this situation, and one of those reasons being that he did not want to sway what happens in the court proceedings, which in my humble opinion does not really make much sense. But anyway, let's just hear what he has to say.
I have not spoken out about this for a couple of different reasons. The main one being, this is going to court this week. Anything I or anybody else says online can and probably will be used by either Evan's defense attorney or the judge to affect the outcome of its ruling. And I didn't want to put Kayla at any risk for that.
I mean, I personally don't understand how James's supposed relationship or friendship or whatever with Evan Johnson would affect this case between Kayla Malec and Evan Johnson. They're not analyzing James Charles, they're analyzing the situation that unfolded between Evan Johnson and Kayla Malec. And in my opinion, again, what James is doing here is using Kayla's trauma as a way to deflect from his own actions. Because realistically, in any form of court case out there, this argument makes no sense. A judge, a jury, even though there wasn't a jury even involved in this situation, would not change their opinion because of who Evan Johnson potentially was hanging out with or even potentially sleeping with. They would be looking at a very specific situation that would not be changed by Evan Johnson's personal friendships and personal relations. And to me personally, it just kind of feels that James's entire response is just him trying to center himself as like an angel in this story who truly wants to do nothing but good. I didn't want to speak about this situation because I didn't want to sway the decision made at the end of it. Or, I just didn't want to distract from what was being spoken about on TikTok and in the public eye. But the reality is this is just all manipulation. And the absolute real reason James did not want to talk about this for as long as possible was because he was hoping that this would be yet again another thing that gets swept under the carpet. I personally believe that James did not want to respond to this whatsoever, and he was hoping this would not blow up in the way he did. Hence, he ignored Zach Sellers until Zach started posting his TikToks and until Kayla Malec started coming out with her videos about this situation. I don't think he would have ever responded to Zach's warning messages about this situation, and instead, I think he would have just ignored the entire thing if Zach never made his TikToks. But obviously, this story has progressively got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then the Be Better podcast happened, and it's kind of pushed James into a position of being forced into talking about these things. And yes, I do believe there has been a lot of misinformation out there about James, but ultimately, that misinformation does not take away from James's actual actions. But then after this, James starts to get into how he's actually started to try and get in contact with Kayla and how Kayla has not been responding to him. I mean, shock, surprise.
I hate that I'm getting online and filming this video right now, but I truthfully have no other choice because I've also spent the last several weeks trying to get in contact with the only person involved in this that actually matters and needs to hear the truth, and that's Kayla Malec. And she has been unwilling to have a conversation with me. And frankly, I don't blame her. After I watched the laughable interview between Be Better and Zach Sellers, I wouldn't want to have a conversation with me either if I was being fed complete bull lies and misinformation from the person whose only source of information is the same man that lied to and abused me for 9 months straight. At this point, I have no choice other than to get online, tell my story, and then prove my story to be true in a court of law. I am suing Zach Sellers and anybody else that thinks it's funny or entertaining to get online and spread defamatory and slanderous lies, misinformation, completely made-up stories for the sake of views, likes, engagement, and galaxies. I'm done.
Now, in fairness, if James thinks that he can prove a lot of these things as defamation and lies, then I absolutely would be for him coming out and actually proving these things as defamation and lies. And if he wants to take this to a court case, then sure, I think he would have the absolute right to do so if he believes he has a genuine case of being slandered, frauded, whatever you want to call it, defamed. And in fairness, his criticism of the Be Better podcast does actually hold some ground. I don't understand why they filmed this podcast with such a lack of evidence, despite Zach claiming so many things. I think it got to a point of where Zach was just desperate to keep on building his career that he had started from this whole James Charles situation, so he was just throwing more and more things out there in order to get attention, in order to get more followers, which obviously is a pretty terrible thing to do, in my opinion, in a situation which is so unbelievably sensitive. At the end of the day, there's no reason to come out with so many outrageous claims when, yes, there is a few screenshots out there that shows that James Charles definitely has done some shady things in this situation. But what's interesting is in James's response, he actually does provide some screenshots himself, which is kind of strange because some of the screenshots he shows actually does prove some of the things that Zach Sellers was actually saying on the Be Better podcast. For example, a big claim that Zach made on the podcast was that James said to Kayla when he found out that Kayla and Evan had broke up and he found out that Evan had done some bad things to Kayla, that he responded with, "Can I have him now?" James actually goes on to show the screenshots of this message himself, and it's like, isn't this a bit of a self-report?
This all started at the beginning of 2025 when I reached out to Kayla about her and Evan being in a Valentine's Day video together. She told me she couldn't, she was crashing out because they had just broken up because he was crazy. I tried to lighten the mood a little bit and make a lighthearted joke asking could I have him now, and then asked what actually happened between them. All she told me was that he did awful things to her and that I would find out more in her 30-part TikTok series. She said she was upset that she helped build his platform based off of lies and abuse, and whenever she was healed, she was going to get online and expose him. I'm going to be so honest, I did not take this conversation very seriously. And obviously, now knowing what we all do, I should have. Reading it back now, it is super clear that she was using humor to cope, and that is perfectly fine and valid. But at the time, I genuinely interpreted these messages as a messy breakup. Maybe he cheated, maybe they got into a drunken argument that ended badly. I could have never imagined what she was actually going through behind the scenes.
Now folks, I'm not going to lie to you, when I first saw what James was saying in this part, I actually did fall for it. I did think, you know what, he's making some good points. I genuinely thought to myself, well, I've had my major criticism of James in the past and I still stand by that, but what he's saying here does make sense, and I think this whole thing has been massively blown out of proportion because people are desperate to have a story against James. And look, I'm the first person out there to criticize James Charles for when he's doing something terrible, hence I'm in this video right now, but, you know, I think there are a lot of people out there that do call James out for some pretty ridiculous things. There is occasions where I open TikTok and James is being called out for another thing and another thing and another thing, and it's like, guys, you don't need to make up stories, you don't need to make up lies, you don't need to blow up things out of proportion. We already have major stories involving James Charles. But then I want to refer to that Angelica Olves video that I mentioned earlier, because in that video, Angelica goes on to state that you need to actually read the text that James is showing on screen. Because yeah, in James's response, he says that he didn't take the conversation seriously, and that Kayla was seemingly using humor to cope at the time, and he interpreted the messages as just a messy breakup. Which honestly would make sense if you don't read the entire transcripts yourself. Because when you read the actual messages, Kayla word for word says, "Imagine the worst things a human can do to you." That is how she described her relationship with Evan Johnson. That is how she described her breakup. Imagine the worst things a human could do to you. Now guys, I don't think I'm nitpicking when I say here that I just don't really understand how that could be interpreted as humorous or coping over a messy breakup. To me personally, if I had a friend or acquaintance that came to me and said, "Oh, by the way, I just went through a really terrible breakup because they did the worst possible things a human can do to you," I would say, "Oh my god, that's awful. How can I help? Please speak to me. Tell me what's wrong. Tell me everything. I'm here for you, man." Or even if I didn't really know them that well and I was like, "Geez, that's terrible." You know what I wouldn't do? You know what I wouldn't do, folks? I wouldn't then go and message the person that supposedly did those worst things a human could do and spark up a friendship with them to the point of where we're hanging out in person because they've flown out to see me. I wouldn't do that. The worst things a human can do to you. I need to reiterate that. I mean, it's not exactly on the nose, is it? It's not exactly humorous. It's not exactly like, messy breakup, spill the tea, sis. No, it's the worst thing a human can do to you. And then consider another message states that she's going to do a 30-part series on him, which is also on top of another message that does indicate that this is a very serious situation. And then there are messages that reference lies and abuse on top of all of those other messages. I mean, I feel like anyone who doesn't even understand social norms can understand that this is a very serious situation, and I honestly struggle to see how anyone could take this as humorous. Yes, obviously, she may actually be downplaying it slightly given the tone of how she's sending these messages, but at the end of the day, she is directly referencing extremely serious things. I think you yourself should take that seriously. But then look at the message of where she says Evan is crazy and she wants to do a 30-part series on him. The reply is James stating, can he have him now? Which, regardless of context here, regardless of all the context surrounding the 30-part potential series and the part of calling him crazy, that's a crazy thing to say to somebody when you tell them that you've just broken up with your partner. Can you imagine just speaking to somebody in your workplace and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going for a breakup right now. It's really bad. It's just not great. And their first response is, oh, can I have him? You know, I'd be kind of annoyed. Honestly, I'd be fuming if somebody said that to me. If somebody said to me, can I have your ex-partner after I told them we'd broken up? I'd be like, mate, what are we, 14, 15-year-olds in high school? Obviously not. What are you on about? James Charles is a fully grown adult. But then add in all the context of the abuse message, the 30-part series, the worst thing a human can do to you, and all these things together, and consider the fact that James in his response said that he interpreted these messages as humorous or someone coping with a messy breakup. It just makes no sense whatsoever, and in my opinion, it's just another case of James manipulating his audience, and it's only going to continue from here. Because after this, James then gets into the topic of his actual friendship levels with Kayla, and basically, up until this point, a lot of people have been debating over Kayla and James's friendship, some saying that they were close friends, some saying they were best friends, some saying they were just work partners. Personally, I don't really think it changes much context here. We've seen that James knew Kayla more than he knew Evan, and that is the context that we need. Yes, them two being best friends or just friends would make this a lot worse, but just the fact that we've seen they've made content together, we've seen that they've hung out together, they've spoken to each other, and he did not really have any close connection with Evan whatsoever. That's all I really need to know here, but James obviously feels the need to debunk a few things said about him.
I wish I could go back in time and been there for her, tried to help her. I wish that I would have asked more questions, but frankly, I didn't feel comfortable doing so. First and foremost, she obviously wasn't ready to talk about it yet based on her last message. And secondly, me and Kayla Malec just weren't close friends. I don't say that to take away from her feelings about this. I don't say that to undermine what she went through. We've only met a couple of times. We collabed in 2023, she guest starred on a podcast with me in 2024, and we hung out at our mutual friend's Halloween party back in October. We've never hung out one-on-one. We've never had a deep conversation. I just really didn't know her that well to be able to interpret these messages and have a better idea of what was actually happening behind closed doors. And I wish more than anything I did, because I should have never gotten involved with this, but I did not know what she was going through.
Yeah, I'm sure you had absolutely no idea what was going on. Now, okay, sure, the friendship of Kayla and James has definitely been exaggerated by a few individuals out there, particularly in my opinion, Zach. I think Zach has come out in the past and said that they were a lot closer than they probably actually were, and yeah, obviously, I don't think that's a good thing to do. I don't think there's a need to dramatize this story. I think it's already as bad as it possibly could be. But yes, I think James does have the right to come out and make these points here that yes, he was not as good friends with Kayla as some have claimed. But as I said, I don't really think this changes anything. Because James literally confirms in this video that they have made content together. They have spoken. They have even hung out in a group setting and have also spoken privately over text about how well Evan did the worst possible things to Kayla. To me personally, the friendship that I can see that those two had was definitely like a mutual sort of friendship. I think we've all been in friend groups where, you know, we've hung out with people and, you know, a regular person comes along, you don't really know them, you don't speak to them that much, but, you know, you'd say you're mutuals, you'd say maybe even you're friends, and I think that obviously these two had some level of connection considering they had made content together as well. But the key thing to note here is that Evan and James, before any of these things took place, did not have a friendship whatsoever, yet he did have at least something, an acquaintance, whatever you want to call it, with Kayla, to the point of where they spoke about personal issues in the same DMs that James has shown in this response. And in those same DMs, Kayla said that the person she dated previously did the worst possible things a human can do to you, to her, and yet despite all of that, James still pursued a friendship with Evan Johnson because he quote-unquote related to Evan and potentially saw that he had a familiar or similar story to what James had gone through in the past. Personally, I don't know about you, but I definitely think he has absolutely snaked Kayla. I think he absolutely has gone behind her back, lied to her, manipulated her, and took advantage of a very sensitive situation just to get closer to Evan Johnson. Now, you can speculate why he would want to do that. Did he have a romantic interest? We'll never really know, most likely. But with what we've seen so far, and with what we're going to get into down in the timeline, obviously, a lot of people have pointed in the direction that, yes, James wanted something with Evan Johnson. So I don't think the excuse of, oh, we weren't exactly as good as friends as people are suggesting really works for me. I think this guy absolutely has done something wrong here. And yes, there has been dramatization. I will admit that from others out there. But at the end of the day, I don't think it really changes anything. And this is why I have such a big problem with the Be Better podcast, because to me personally, this whole thing flipped the whole situation on its head, like I mentioned earlier, because James does now have the opportunity to kind of muddle things up, mix things up, and even play ignorance, just because of the fact there are a lot of unsubstantiated claims out there about him right now that cannot be proven. James can now come into his response and play sheer ignorance like he knew nothing was going on, and yes, people fell for it.
I really hate to admit it, but I did have a brief friendship with Evan Johnson that started and ended well before I ever learned about any of the violence that was going on behind the scenes.
What's crazy about this is literally a minute before saying this, he showed us a text where Kayla Malec word for word says to him that, yeah, Evan Johnson did the worst things a human can do to you, to her. But yet he's still got the audacity to say that he didn't know about any of the violence beforehand, which is just complete bollocks. We have seen Kayla, the moment she broke up with Evan, tell James that yes, there was abuse and yes, there were the worst things possible and she was going to do a 30-part series. Yet he has come on to here to actually state that he didn't know about any of the violence. And the crazy thing is people actually believed James. People somehow saw what James was saying here and took him at his word. And what's crazy is even after stating that he didn't know about any of the violence, he goes on to claim that he actually thought that Evan was the victim in this situation.
He reached out to me a couple of days later asking me for advice and told me the same exact story that Zach Sellers believed and then repeated on the Be Better podcast, which was that the relationship was toxic, they both said things and did things that they shouldn't have, and a bunch of other stories that genuinely made me believe Evan Johnson was the victim in the situation. He told me that he moved back to Nashville to go to church and get therapy and try to become a better man, and he seemed vulnerable. He seemed real, and he seemed scared that Kayla was going to get online and start telling lies about him, and he knew exactly what to say to relate it back to a situation that I was in that made me have sympathy for him and be on his side. I feel so dumb for ever believing him, but when I was in a similar situation, all I cared about was anybody treating me like a human being and hearing me out and being there for him, so that's what I tried to provide. We became closer, we would start FaceTiming, he was very suicidal and depressed, and eventually he told me that he wanted to come out to LA to escape and get his mind off of things for a weekend, so I invited him out. All we did was sit on the couch, order food, watch movies, but over the course of the weekend, I slowly started to notice that some of his stories were not exactly lining up. There were inconsistencies, and I started to get worried that I might be on the wrong side of things, and that was confirmed as soon as Kayla noticed that he was at my house and I had to lie to her. I didn't know what to do. I realized then that I was in the middle of a very messy situation that I should have never gotten involved with in the first place, but this man was staying with me and I didn't know how to get out of it. Later on that night, I told Evan straight up I was uncomfortable, I was upset that I had to lie to her, and that we could not hang out any further. He respected that, and the next morning, he flew home. As soon as Evan left LA, I immediately started making myself unavailable to him because I recognized that he was not the man he was telling me he was. But it wasn't until a month later, when Kayla uploaded her video, He Doesn't Love You, that I actually got to sit and watch how much of a monster he is. My jaw was on the floor for all 2 hours of that video. I could not believe what I was watching and seeing. The horrendous verbal abuse, the violent physical abuse. I was shocked. I was ashamed for not taking me and Kayla's conversation more seriously. I was embarrassed for ever believing that man's lies and manipulation, and I was angry with myself that I ever allowed that man into my home.
Now there is obviously a lot to unpack here. But firstly, without any context, we've seen Kayla told James directly that yes, she's a victim in her saying Evan did the worst thing a human could possibly do to her, and rather than listen to that and accept that, he then went to the person she said did those things and listened to his story, took his side, believed he's the victim, and gave him advice. And this is just absolutely disgusting. And I don't know if this is controversial to say, but you do have to wonder, if Evan Johnson wasn't a conventionally attractive, skinny man, would James have done any of this? I know that sounds crazy to say, but based on everything we've seen so far, James willingly looked past an incredible amount of information just to build a friendship with this guy. And as you're going to discover throughout the rest of this video, James clearly was attracted to this guy. I won't show the evidence to back that right now, but we will get into it in the later parts of this timeline. But to me personally, I don't believe that James would have done any of this if Evan Johnson wasn't conventionally attractive. Because James is desperate, and he always has been. I mean, going back to his video in 2021, where he apologized or took accountability for these actions, in the same video, one of his defenses was that he is desperate.
I like to think of myself as pretty put together and on top of things, and I couldn't understand why relationships were the one outlier. Why were they not working? Why was this area of me so different? And I finally came to a conclusion. It sucks, and it is ridiculously embarrassing to admit this, but I think I have to, and that is that I'm desperate.
Yeah, I guess James never really changed after this situation, because based on everything we've seen, James still very much is desperate. Because trying to build a friendship with someone you've been told did the worst possible things to their ex is crazy. And it's not even like James had a friendship with Evan in the first place. I think that's what makes this even worse, and it does take us back to the initial clip that I just showed you. Because James's first defense is Zach Stellers received the same story from Evan that James did, and I guess that's a defense because, you know, Zach also fell for that story. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Zach has done some bad things in this situation and saga, and I definitely think he has used this saga to his advantage to launch a social media campaign, career, whatever you want to call it. But in fairness to Zach, he did have some level of connection or friendship with Evan Johnson before any of these events transpired. And to me personally, that's why I don't see him as guilty as James Charles. Because as I mentioned previously, James had a friendship or acquaintanceship with Kayla Malec, but not Evan Johnson. His friendship with Evan Johnson only started after these allegations started to come out about Evan. As I keep saying, he was told that Evan did the worst possible things, and he decided to start a friendship with that person and even see that person as the victim themselves. But another thing to mention here is James states that he only started to realize that Evan was a bad or suspicious person once he started to hang out with him.
I slowly started to notice that some of his stories were not exactly lining up. There were inconsistencies, and I started to get worried that I might be on the wrong side of things, and that was confirmed as soon as Kayla noticed that he was at my house and I had to lie to her. I didn't know what to do. I realized then that I was in the middle of a very messy situation that I should have never gotten involved with in the first place.
Now, to me personally, this clip doesn't really make much sense, considering that James in the same clip states that he quite clearly had multiple conversations with Evan over the phone beforehand?
He reached out to me a couple of days later asking me for advice and told me the same exact story that Zach Sellers believed and then repeated on the Be Better podcast, which was that the relationship was toxic, they both said things and did things that they shouldn't have, and a bunch of other stories that genuinely made me believe Evan Johnson was the victim in the situation.
So let me get this straight. You guys were speaking over messages. You were even possibly having phone calls or FaceTimes. You were conversing about very deep things. You told us earlier that the reason you became friends with this guy is because you relate to his situation and you even saw him as the victim. To get to that point, you would have had to have a whole conversation about his relationship with Kayla Malec, whether he was lying or not. You would have had to have a conversation about those things over the phone, and yet you only started to realize this guy was a bad guy once you started to hang out with him in person and speak to him in person. To me, I find that very confusing, because why would he randomly start to say things in person that he wasn't saying to you privately when you were in the progress of believing this guy to be a victim? But also in the same clip, James states that Evan was also trying to become a better person, and I guess that's why he emphasized with him.
He told me that he moved back to Nashville to go to church and get therapy and try to become a better man.
Now, to me personally, again, this makes no sense, because if he was the victim, if you truly believe that Evan Johnson was the victim, then why would he need to become a better person? I don't personally think that Kayla Malec needs to become a better person due to this Evan Johnson situation. All I see her as is absolutely the victim in this situation who deserves justice and support. And if you believed that Evan Johnson was the victim in this situation, then why would you also think that he needs to become a better person? To me personally, all of these things, when you really add them up and just think about them for longer than 5 seconds, it just doesn't really make much sense. But then you add the cherry on top of the cake where he says that he needed to lie to Kayla Malec.
As soon as Kayla noticed that he was at my house and I had to lie to her.
Now hold up. If you believed that Evan Johnson was the victim, you emphasized with him, you thought he was becoming a better person, and you've spent all this time with him conversing about his personal issues, then why would you need to lie to Kayla Malec? In fact, why would you even be speaking to Kayla Malec if you thought that she did terrible things to him? Because in my opinion, that doesn't make much sense, because James now in today's timeline is stating that yes, Kayla is a victim, which of course she is, and he's standing up for her. But based on how he has handled supposed victims, or at least who he believed to be a victim in the past, does this still mean that he's willing to have a conversation with Evan Johnson just based on his own logic? Because in this context, he has spoken to Kayla on FaceTime whilst being with somebody he believes to be a victim, speaking to their supposed abuser and lying to them. Adding all of these things together, it really doesn't make much sense whatsoever, and in fact, just makes James look like a complete and utter liar and manipulator. To me, James clearly knew what he was doing in this entire situation, and he obviously was embarrassed by it when Kayla started to suspect him and even called him up to ask if he was with Evan. But another thing to also point out here is James has been reiterating throughout all of this that he was not friends with Kayla Malec. And sure, I don't think they were best friends or potentially even good friends, but why would she even be FaceTiming you if you weren't acquaintances or weren't friends or mutuals? To me, if someone's calling you about something that personal and asking you where you are and what you're doing, you're probably friends. So obviously, when you start to add everything together here, it really does just seem that yes, James is lying about everything. And the crazy thing is we're only halfway through this video and you're probably thinking, wow, this is one of the worst responses I have ever seen. I bet the audience went absolutely crazy and laughed at James, mocked James, and just overall criticized James for everything. Well, no. Because this got 72 million views, 4.4 million likes, and 43,000 likes on a comment stating that they believe James. People absolutely adored this response. In fact, I've seen some people state that this was one of the best responses an influencer has ever made to any form of dramatic situation. And I think ultimately, this is the best critique possible when it comes to TikTok. This really shows the lack of reading comprehension that TikTok viewers have, the lack of critical thinking skills, the lack of just being able to interpret nuance in situations, and the lack of being able to interpret when you are being manipulated, because everything in this TikTok is fundamentally, so far, complete bollocks and utter manipulation. And sadly, I think this all again comes down to the fact that there was needless things put out there on the Be Better podcast by Zach Sellers, because what James goes on to do in the future parts of this clip is call out Zach for multiple things. And it's a pretty smart way of dealing with things, because it comes down to what I mentioned earlier of James using previous lies in other situations to make people think, well, if they're all lies, then why would the real story be true?
A couple of days later, I started getting messages on Instagram from Zach Sellers, Evan's best friend, basically warning me that Evan had lied to both of us and telling me that I should cut him off. I didn't see these messages at first until he made a public TikTok accusing me of still supporting Evan behind the scenes, and I messaged him right away because I was confused. His messages genuinely seemed nice. He seemed like he was checking in, warning me to make sure that I was okay and have cut Evan off, because he knew that we were both told the same exact lies and stories from Evan. The only reason he even knew I was involved at all was because he was physically with Evan as his best friend, supporting him every single day. It took me 3 days with Evan to realize that something wasn't right here. It took Zach 3 months. So to act this way privately and then to get online as if I'm some monster was wild to me.
Now, honestly, despite my criticism of James Charles, I actually do think he made some fairly decent points here, such as, why did Zach remain friends with the guy for so unbelievably long? Because yeah, Zach did remain friends. Even after admitting to being suspicious of the guy, he stayed friends with the guy for a very, very long time. And I think James is right in calling Zach out for this. But at the same time, as I mentioned throughout this video, it was very different to James's scenario. Zach was not friends with Kayla like James was, or work acquaintances, whatever James would have calls it. I think the friendship aspect here is different because he had a prior friendship with Evan Johnson, or at least connection to Evan Johnson, and he did not know that Evan was a bad person before he initiated a friendship. Whereas James, as I've said before, only knew bad things about Evan Johnson, and he still decided to initiate a friendship there. So yeah, it is very different in my opinion, and unfortunately I think Zach has handled this situation pretty terribly aside from his original TikToks in this situation. But realistically, I think both have done bad in this situation, which James actually continues to go into in the next clip.
What started off as a video of James Charles supporting Evan Johnson behind the scenes snowballed into more videos, more content, and then live streams. Every single night Zach has been live asking for galaxies in exchange for showing more receipts. He's been asking his followers for their cities and locations so he can go on tour with Kayla after this is all over with. He's even been asking for donations on PayPal to fund a merch line.
Now yeah, this again is a very, very fair criticism to have. Zach very much was doing this.
I will be dropping Bye Sister merch because there's no more sister. You're going to fall off of this platform.
Now obviously this is absolutely disgusting, and it's hilarious that he tries to paint this in some form of good way, but the reality is this is just a representation of the main problem in this story, because Zach has blatantly used this entire thing for his benefit. Despite him having some genuine points at the very beginning, it's clear he realized he could get followers off this, he could get some form of micro niche internet fame from this, and he could get money from this. I think his original points and message surrounding James Charles absolutely does stand, but sadly I don't think he was the right messenger to tell that message. But obviously he was the person friends with Evan Johnson. He had slight contact with James by speaking to James via Evan Johnson, and he knew about what was going on between James and Evan Johnson, and that's why he came out about this story. So overall, yes, I do think Zach Zach has done a lot of bad things in this story, and this is what I meant earlier about nuance. Not everyone is a hero in this story, even the people that have come out speaking in support of Kayla Malec. Not everyone has the right intentions in this story, and it's clear Zach falls into that category. And it's just incredibly frustrating because I feel like this story is such an obvious slam dunk. Like, the first half of this response was absolutely god awful, but because of Zach Sellers' own selfish actions and the desire to launch a social media career, he has now given the opportunity to James to defend himself against fake things that have been spread about him, things that cannot be proven about him, and because of that, he has obviously now got the opportunity to basically clear his name, even if it wasn't correctly cleared. And that only continues in the next part of this clip, where he starts to speak about the Be Better interview. And yeah, once again, I think James makes some pretty decent points.
This has nothing to do with getting justice for Kayla and everything about making an opportunity for himself. And the perfect one came along when Be Better flew him out to Canada for their podcast interview. Aside from the timeline that I just told you guys, everything else in that hour-long episode is complete shit. To start rumors about somebody online is one thing. Unfortunately, I know that that comes with the job, but to publicly accuse them of prostitution is ridiculous. There is no proof, no evidence of any of the ridiculous claims that Zach is making because they did not happen, which is why I have no choice other than to take legal action. But before I do that, I want to quickly take a second and clear the air on some things that have really set me over the edge. First and foremost, Evan Johnson and I did not in any way, shape, or form have a physically relationship. We did not have while he was here, and I did not, under any circumstances, pay Evan Johnson for favors, not in person, and certainly not online through a secret OF account where I'm apparently funding his entire life. That is absurd. Not that it's anybody's business, but I do have an OF account. I'm a grown adult. I barely use it, but Zach, if you would like to see, I will gladly send you a screenshot of my transaction history. I have nothing to hide, and I have not sent Evan Johnson $1 single. Zach claims to know all this information to be true because he pressured Evan into getting drunk and telling him what happened on the trip. I don't know if Evan lied to him to make the trip seem more fun and exciting, or if Zachy literally just made this up for funsies. I would like to believe that that isn't the case and that he was manipulated in this situation as well, but he claims to have seen a video on Evan's phone of him having with me. Zach, post it. If you have the receipt, if you have the video evidence, you can upload it. You have my full consent and permission. I've had far worse posted to me online that I didn't consent to. Go right ahead. But you can't because there is no video of something that did not happen. Be Better doesn't even stand by these claims because he's now added a disclaimer to their interview that says he was not able to verify a single thing that Zach said.
Now, honestly, James is absolutely right here. When going through the Be Better interview section earlier, we came to the understanding that this interview was really not good. Sure, some things might have come true in the interview, such as the messages about can I have him now? But realistically, as I've said time and time again throughout this video, most of the stuff said in that interview was just unsubstantiated claims with no evidence to back any of it whatsoever. And I actually do believe James in what he is saying here about the existence of a certain tape not being real, mainly down to the fact that, yeah, James gave permission to Zach to post the tape. And I just think, again, this is such an absurd thing to do. Why would you lie about this? Why would you come onto your social media page or someone else's social media page to make up this information when there already is information out there that makes James look bad? And it all comes down to the fact that Zach is so unbelievably desperate to be an influencer, it's almost embarrassing at this point. And what's hilarious about this response, in my opinion, is James does not make himself look any better, in my personal opinion, yet at the same time, he takes people like Zach and even Be Better and makes them look arguably not as bad as James, but definitely a lot worse in this situation. A lot of people were questioning Zach's ethics by taking Kayla's story and trying to make it as launching point for his new career, and a lot of people out there were criticizing Be Better's journalistic integrity and ethics because obviously not really combating against Zach in what he was saying and the claims he was making on that podcast was not a very smart thing to do. And I think that's why this response went down so well, because yeah, James is very right and correct in some situations. He speaks very well, and that absolutely ends up covering for the first 7 minutes of manipulation. Because when it comes to James speaking about his own actions in this scenario, there's no defense. It's just lies upon lies and manipulation. But when it comes to the wrongdoings of other individuals, James is smart, he is quick, and that's because he's a professional influencer. James has been in this space for a very, very long time. He's been involved in so many situations. He knows how to carpet sweep. He knows how to get the public in his hands. And he's done it again. And I think it just shows this guy is way smarter than a lot of people give him credit for. And now the response ends with James targeting Be Better and some of the things that Be Better said about YouTube. And yeah, once again, James is making some good points that really aren't about him, but more about the other people's wrongdoings.
There's a new narrative started by Be Better that I am trying to silence anybody that talks about this issue. First and foremost, this is literally the biggest thing on TikTok right now. I don't understand how anybody could possibly assume that I'm trying to silence people, but Be Better made a video basically saying that I'm working with YouTube behind the scenes to manipulate their algorithm and get their video hidden. I truthfully wish this was possible. I've been making content for 8 long years now. There are videos on YouTube with 5, 10, 20 million views that if I could have gotten them removed, I would have. But Be Better, I know you said you're having your lawyers reach out to YouTube. So YouTube, I give you my full permission to release any communications between myself or my team to you guys about this matter because, again, they don't exist.
Now again, James isn't wrong here. I think I've got around 50 videos on my YouTube channel calling James out for a multitude of things, such as messaging 16-year-olds. And if this were the case, if James had some magical ability where it allows him to take down videos that call him out for certain things, I feel like I would have fell victim to that a very long time ago. I've been calling James out for years now, and if he possibly had that ability to take videos down, I'm sure by now he would have taken down one of my videos, but he absolutely has not. And I actually want to now refer to Be Better's video, which James keeps on referencing here. Because honestly, and I don't mean this personally, but I just don't really understand it.
So I just wanted to let you guys know that James Charles is officially trying to get my video banned from YouTube. I have now received several messages from people saying that they either cannot access the video or when they search it, it doesn't pop up. I will include screenshots here. I cannot say I'm surprised. YouTube at the end of the day is a corporation, and the products that they sell is the content, and their true customers are the advertisers. And James Charles makes them millions of dollars every year. He's probably the #1 creator in the beauty space. If you think that he doesn't have the ability to call in a favor at YouTube to just say, hey, guys, can you turn the volume down on this one post? Because it's mutually beneficial for both YouTube and James for him to continue to be able to make the money and for them to, in turn, protect his reputation. Can't say I'm surprised. Super disappointing to know that YouTube, I guess, supports domestic violence, supports silencing victims, supports protecting predators. Very upsetting. You can be expecting to receive a letter from my lawyer in the morning.
Now, throughout this video today, I've been referencing slander and defamation quite a lot, but I think here, right with what Be Better is saying right now, right here in this clip, this is probably the most clear-cut example of defamation that we have seen throughout this situation. Like, to say YouTube support domestic violence is an absolutely wild statement. And all because of this one piece of evidence that he's seemingly showing in this screenshot here. But the thing is, as somebody that has been on YouTube for a very, very long time, I've been watching videos since the site was made in around 2005, I know that YouTube videos can have errors. You can be watching a video and get an error, but your individual experience does not mean that everyone else is experiencing that error code that you yourself has received. And in my opinion, with what he is showing here, I don't think there is a justification to kind of say that YouTube supports DV. And I especially do not believe that YouTube are protecting James Charles, in my personal opinion, especially when you consider the fact that when you search James Charles's name, the first thing that comes up is Be Better's video, and it had around 750,000 views at the time of screenshotting it. And I don't really understand why this argument of censorship is really coming up here, because trust me, YouTube don't care about James Charles. They don't care whether he's famous, infamous, a criminal, or not a criminal. They just care about their website functioning, ads still coming in, and that's that. This website is way, way too big to care about these individual issues. And when there is an issue where it can be criminal, YouTube have actually taken action against James in the past when they temporarily demonetized his channel during a 16-year-old situation. And the thing is YouTube really didn't need to do that. In fact, that probably brought more negative criticism directed towards YouTube, but they still did that. So I don't really understand the point of Be Better's TikTok, because in my opinion, what he's saying cannot be proven whatsoever, and in fact, the absolute opposite of that can be proven, and all it does is just give James more ammunition to fire back with. And James kind of ends this video by just once again dunking on Zach.
Zach has also now made a video claiming that my lawyers have reached out to him to threaten him, to silence him, and to offer him hush money. This is not true. Zach, my lawyers cannot contact you directly, so instead they emailed your modeling agency because that is the only contact you have listed. There was no threat, there was no offer, they were simply asking for the contact of your lawyers. I told you I was going to sue you, and this is what the beginning of that process looks like.
So yes, that is the ending of James's response, and at this point in the chronological part of the timeline that we're in, this whole thing had become a complete and utter mess. The response itself from James to the allegations made towards him of being friends with Evan Johnson was absolutely terrible, but because of some fair and valid points he made in the last 3 minutes of his response, it somehow won over the court of public opinion. And it just drives me kind of insane when I see things like this in these types of situations, of where the internet and the audiences viewing these TikToks seem to kind of believe that there can always only be one person in the right and one person in the wrong. There can't just be two people in this situation and both of them are in the wrong, such as Zach and James Charles. Because in my opinion, that absolutely is the case here. One tried to make a career out of the situation, and one obviously, very clearly, in my opinion, created a friendship with Evan Johnson despite knowing the things that he knew. But what's interesting with this response is that this is where the story seemingly wrapped up for a lot of people. After this, James gained a lot of followers back from the ones that he had lost, but to the point of where he is now gaining followers at a record level on TikTok apparently. He is more popular than he has ever been and more successful than he has ever been, and making so much money, it's absolutely ridiculous. And it all comes down to the fact that Zach Sellers and Be Better seemingly butchered this story. And I don't get it. I really don't. I don't understand why the average TikTok viewer can't see that James obviously still has done bad here. But of course, you're probably wondering, well, how did Zach and Be Better respond to this situation? Well, Be Better actually did post a 9-minute response to the situation, addressing multiple things, and honestly, the response isn't that bad. Now, he started off by stating that he did not make his interview with Zach for money, and actually he just made this interview because he wanted to make more people know about the story, and that he also had Kayla's blessing, and then he shared evidence that he donated the revenue he made from the video to charity, which obviously is a good thing. Honestly, out of Zach, Be Better, and James Charles, I do believe that Be Better at least had good intentions in this story. I think he wanted to get the real story out there. I just don't think he really handled the interview setting that well. I feel like he should have pushed back against Zach more, but this was a bit of a new situation and a new setting to him from what I can see. And yeah, obviously, that's not an excuse when you're putting somebody on a platform like this in such a sensitive situation. But I don't really think that Be Better had nefarious intentions. He also then goes on to address another situation that was ongoing at the time involving Zach, as Zach Sellers was currently facing a large amount of allegations, and Be Better states that he is not going to ignore them, which at the time was a developing story that I'm not going to divert into, mainly because I want to stay on track here. But overall, this is kind of where we're going to leave Zach Sellers in terms of this story. But yeah, Zach has faced some very, very serious allegations was, and obviously that just damaged his case even more. Now, in fairness to Zach, he has posted a TikTok responding to these allegations, saying that he's taking them very seriously and that his lawyers are involved, but also in regards to his response to what James said in his response video, pretty much Zach came out with a 2.5-minute long TikTok where realistically he wasn't really adding anything to the conversation. He was more just trying to shut down James and just call James a liar and just say James is pretty much guilty for all of the things that he had previously said. And overall, I don't really think there's much value in going through that TikTok, because honestly we'd be here all day. So with that, we're going to continue with Be Better's response, because I think there is definitely more here and definitely some better points. In particular, one of those points being when James said that he didn't want to speak about the situation because he didn't want to affect the court case and its potential outcome.
So one of the many lies said by James Charles in his response video was his reasoning as to why he didn't speak sooner, which was he was so worried that a TikTok video he made could negatively impact the outcome for Kayla. Now, the reason why this is untrue is because there was no trial between Kayla Malec and Evan Johnson. There was a sentencing hearing between the Crown and Evan Johnson in which charges were pressed and in which he pled guilty to. So there was no jury, there was no ongoing trial, and the idea that anything James Charles said in a TikTok video was going to be used is completely untrue and was a clever way for him to deflect the real reason as to why he didn't address all of this, which is that he was caught red-handed.
Now, this is obviously a completely valid point, and I think it really does represent James's manipulation. And it really does just show to us that James was willing to go to any extent to lie and manipulate in the situation to make it benefit him and his narrative. And as I said earlier, even if there was a jury involved in this situation and it was going to be debated over months, James's personal relations or friendship with Evan Johnson would not have affected the outcome whatsoever. But as Be Better says here, there was no jury involved in this situation. It was a sentencing. There was no reason that James could affect this case whatsoever. And obviously, James have just come out with this to try and manipulate the audience into thinking he's this great guy, this angel that could do no wrong. And honestly, I think what Be Better is saying here pretty much dismantles most of James's biggest arguments, and if anything, just shows that James is an even bigger manipulator than we originally thought. And then after this, Be Better only continues to go further, where he starts to speak about James minimalizing his friendship with Kayla.
Now, there was a very obvious logical contradiction made in James's response video, which was the way he attempted to absolve himself was by minimizing the friendship he had with Kayla, by saying, I didn't really know her that well. But then the follow-up question to that would be, if you didn't know Kayla that well, then how well could you have possibly known Evan Johnson, someone who you only knew through Kayla? And the implication is you actually didn't know him at all. He was a stranger to you. Yet you still believed him over her, gave him advice, flew him to your home, lied to Kayla when she asked you if he's at your house, and one of the worst aspects, in my opinion, was you actually weaponized the information that Kayla confided in you with when she said, I experienced horrific things, and I'm putting together a 30-part Who the F Did I Marry series on the abuse I suffered. Screenshotted that and sent it to Evan as a way to exploit the vulnerability and anxiety he felt over Kayla coming forward with the horrific abuse that she suffered, and then offering yourself as a shoulder to cry on because we all know you want to get in his pants.
Now here we are kind of dealing with some of the same issues that we were dealing with in the podcast previously, of where Be Better is making a lot of claims about James Charles and Kayla Malec, but he isn't really providing any evidence whatsoever. And I understand he probably believes what he's saying, but at the end of the day, us, the audience, don't really know who Be Better is as a person, and I don't really trust any influencer out there that is delivering the news unless they provide receipts to some extent. You need to provide evidence and screenshots and receipts in a situation this serious. And even though I don't like James Charles, it doesn't mean that I'm just going to take everything that Be Better says at his word and believe him no matter what. But in fairness, with what he was saying about how James met Evan through Kayla, he's absolutely correct, and it fundamentally does make things even worse. Because yeah, James, in my opinion, clearly did have some level of a friendship with Kayla, but he did not have one with Evan, and yet he still chose Evan over her. But what's interesting is, despite that, the opinion on the whole situation still seems very mixed. In fact, Most people are just saying that this situation is not about Be Better, and one comment even said, is this even about Kayla anymore? And look, whilst I do agree with what the comments are saying here, obviously this isn't just about Be Better. I think he does have the right to defend himself, and honestly, I think he did have the right to make the original podcast that he did. I just think he didn't handle that podcast very well, and I think he's still kind of showing signs of it in this TikTok here. If I was to offer any advice to Be Better, it would be come with more screenshots and receipts. I don't necessarily believe he's been malicious in this story like I think Zach Sellers has been, but I do think he needs to hold himself to some level of journalistic integrity. You have the responsibility to provide evidence for the things that you are saying, and just because I don't like James does not mean I'm going to believe you in every single situation. But obviously, yeah, a lot of people have been wondering about Kayla in this situation, because all of this has been ongoing, and really all we've heard from Kayla up until this point is Kayla stating that she's frustrated that she can't speak about any of this stuff because of the court proceedings. Now, yeah, I can completely understand why Kayla was very frustrated here, because if I was dealing with a very similar situation and I could not say anything about it, I would be very annoyed. And that does lead us nicely into the 16th of May 2025, when Kayla finally spoke about everything going on in a 3-part TikTok where she pretty much exposes absolutely everything. And she starts it all off by explaining why she wants to tell her story here, and also the truth behind her friendship with James Charles.
Well, I'm sure by now everybody knows about the situation with me and James. And everybody has told their side of the story except me. And in my opinion, I was the one fucked over. So it's only fair for me to tell my side of the story, how I was fucked over. And I wanted to wait a little bit, have a little bit more time to just like relish in the fact that I won in court. But the response video was posted an hour after I announced that I won my court case. 1 hour. So I have like all of my bullet points written down next to me, and I hope I could do this all in one part, but everybody told their side, and like I said, in my opinion, I was the one fucked over here. So to start off, I would not consider me and James to be best friends at all. I don't even think I'd consider us close friends. We've collabed a few times. I went over to his house, what was that, like 9 months ago, to help him promote his company on live stream. We would text here and there about certain things, but it was definitely not like we were best friends. I like trying to put this into like it's kind of like that one person that's in your class at school that you're like mutuals with. Y'all are like acquaintances. Like we were acquaintances, but I don't think that excuses anything that happens in my opinion, but that's the best way to describe it. We definitely were not best friends. We were not that close, but we were acquaintances.
Now, I personally believe that this is a very good start to her response to all of this, because obviously there has been a lot of misinformation out there about the friendship that Kayla and James had. Some suggested that they were best friends, some said that they were friends, some said they weren't friends, and here we finally have an answer. Based on Kayla's words, yes, they seem to be acquaintances. Now, from my personal perspective, you know, they've hung out, they've been in group settings together, they've spoken about personal things over text together. Now, maybe I'm a loser, but I would call that a friendship, not an acquaintanceship. But at the end of the day, what she's saying here obviously does address the fact that, yes, she did have a connection to James Charles. And I think despite him not being friends with her or best friends with her, it doesn't change the fact that, yes, they had a connection and he knew about her life and some things that we're going to get into now. Because after this, Kayla starts to speak about James's interest in Evan. And this is something that I kind of hinted at earlier when I mentioned that there is clear evidence out there now that James has some form of lust for Evan Johnson.
This all starts almost immediately when I made me and Evan's relationship public on TikTok. So I had posted a video with Evan next to me, and me and James have never DM'd on TikTok. The only previous messages we had on TikTok was us collab posting from when we would film together when I started my Glow Up series, like I was just talking about. And he like sends me my video. I don't know how you do it. Like he sent me the video, and then under it he said, "Girl, who is this?" And I was like, "Oh, this new guy that I met, I think I'm in love, ha 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 ha. Then a month and a half later, he slides up on another video of me and Evan together. We have not DM'd on TikTok since this. And it's a video of us dancing together at Yosemite, and James slides up and says, girl, he's so hot. And I'm just like, haha, yeah, whatever, cool. So at that point, that's like the only time that we would text was about him saying how hot Evan was.
Now, James can say that Kayla and him aren't friends a million different times, and Kayla even can say it herself, but to DM someone multiple times about how you find their partner attractive and not consider that a friendship is very, very confusing to me. Just looking at these messages here, I think they really do indicate friendship. But also, let's just speak about these DMs here. I think they really do add a lot of context to this story, because obviously everyone has been debating about all of this and wondering how James could turn on Kayla and start up a friendship with Evan Johnson after all of what he knew. And now we have an answer. It was very obvious, in my opinion, he was attracted to Evan. He word for word states it. And I mentioned the hypothetical earlier of, would James have done any of this if Evan Johnson was not a conventionally attractive man? No, I don't think he would have, and I think from the very get-go, he most likely would have been on Kayla Malec's side. I don't think he would have got Evan to fly out to him. I don't think they would have hung out in person, had deep conversations to the point of where he now believes that he is the victim. I don't believe any of that would have happened, and I just think this all comes down to the fact that James was desperate and attracted to Evan.
So yeah, like at this point, the only things I've heard is how hot he thinks my boyfriend is. Cool, whatever. So now from December, it's January. And me, Brennan, Emma, and my boyfriend are in Hawaii. And this was the trip that we ended up breaking up, and all of that happened. It's about the third night that we're there, and I don't know if I'm allowed to include this. I'm going to anyways, but we're all sitting on the balcony of our Airbnb talking, and Evan starts saying that James is DMing him on Instagram. And immediately I'm like, what the are you doing? Why are you DMing James? Like, immediately I'm just like, no, like, you're not going to do that. That's weird in my opinion. And at this point, our relationship was basically already over. And even Brennan was like, and Emma were like, what the are you doing? Why are you DMing him on Instagram? So we look over at the phone, and Evan sends James a picture on Instagram. So like, you know how you snap on Snapchat, like doing that on Instagram, like sending pictures back and forth. And Evan is like, you should go to Hawaii with us. And James sends back this saying like, why should I come to Hawaii? And that for the first time is when I was like, what the f-? And I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure they continued to text throughout the night. I was not like caring enough to go through his phone. I was just like, why are you messaging him? And I just red flags. It was just so fucking weird. Because mind you, at this point, me and James don't text. Like, me and James aren't even texting like that. James is only texting me to say how hot he is. And now he's sending him snaps over Instagram saying, why should I come to Hawaii? Like, that's weird. I would only do that if I'm like trying to or if I'm trying to flirt, you know? Like, it was just weird.
Now, I should just say here before you go any further that yes, at this point in the timeline, we did not have the provided context to why James sent this image to Evan. Yes, obviously Kayla has her story, but of course later on, James will come back and respond to this. But when you start to add 2 and 2 together, you see the screenshot that we saw previously with James lusting over Evan, and then you see these Snapchat or Instagram messages. Obviously, things start to look extremely suspicious, and it really starts to paint a picture that James was absolutely into Evan from very early on.
We have not DM'd on TikTok since this, and it's a video of us dancing together at Yosemite, and James slides up and says, girl, he's so hot.
Like, why is this guy so obsessed with thirsting after the people that he absolutely should not be thirsting for? And I think the reason Kayla is showing us all of this is to mainly prove to us that James didn't just randomly engage in a personal friendship with Evan because he felt bad for him as he saw him in a similar situation like he claimed before. I think if you've got more than 5 brain cells, you can kind of put things together together and realize James, in my opinion, was pursuing Evan Johnson because, you know, he had a little bit of a crush on the guy. And it also makes that "can I have him now" message straight after discovering the breakup even crazier. And yeah, Kayla gets into that as well.
So fast forward literally 2 weeks past this, me and Evan have broken up, and literally the day after we break up, James texts me, and he basically is asking me and Evan to be a part of this painted commercial video. And it was supposed to be like me and Evan, and it was like a couple thing, and it was for Valentine's Day. So I respond, and I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, but we just broke up, ha ha ha. So I text James that we have broken up, and basically the first thing he says in response is, can I have him now? Just responds, can I have him now? And then was like, ha ha ha, just kidding, what happened? I then proceed to tell him that, let me actually like read the text like word for word. I'm gonna green screen this part, everything else I'm inserting in, but I wanna read this like word for word. So yeah, do you wanna be in a painted video with your man? I explained that we broke up, I was gonna do a 30-part series. And mind you, he is the only person that I told, because this is a day after we officially broke up, he is the only person I told about a, quote, 30-part series that I was going to film about what I had went through. He goes, what? I go, girl, he's crazy. And then there we go. What happened? Can I have him now? Once again, didn't really think much of it, but my senses were a little bit heightened now after the whole Hawaii Instagram DMing situation, but whatever. Then tell him, imagine the worst things a human can do. It would take hours to text, but you'll see this series soon. He then asks again about if I'm actually doing a series, which I'll explain why that has a lot to do with more going on. But he asks again about the series, then says, I'm sorry. And I go, oh, just wait. I gave this man a platform based off his lies and abuse. I'm gonna wait to heal from it and then clock it, which I did do. And then he goes, I'm sorry, Kayla. And I said, you're good. Thank you. So that was the last time we texted until he flew Evan out to California. But in these, I made it pretty clear that Evan had over. I brought up abuse, the worst thing a human can do. I mean, I obviously did not go into depth with what I had went through. At this point, like James said in his video, my friends didn't even know, my family didn't even know the full story. Nobody knew the full story. And obviously, I don't expect him to sit there and ask, you know, oh, well, what happened? I don't expect him to do that. I get feeling uncomfortable in that situation.
Now, this kind of goes into what I was speaking about earlier. Even if you don't know the person very well, if somebody says to you, oh, yeah, my ex did the worst possible things a human can do to me, you don't then go and find that ex and befriend them. I'll give you an example. If a coworker came up to you and said, yeah, I'm going for a breakup right now, it's really tough, and they then said that the things that their ex done to them was the worst thing anyone could possibly do, and they're going to do a 30-part documentary on them, would you then pursue a friendship with that said ex? You wouldn't, because you would be absolutely mental if you did so, and also absolutely evil if you did so. But also, it probably wouldn't look good if you then pursued that person whilst having a previous history of lusting after them. Because to me, what it would indicate is that you don't care about the person that told you that they're a victim and have gone through all of these terrible things, and instead you've seen what they're saying and been like, jackpot, that person's now available to me, I can swoop in there. And I don't care what James says, it very much feels like that's what's happened in this situation. But then that takes us into the second part of Kayla's TikToks about all of this, where Kayla continues to speak about James and why he obviously should not have done what he did.
No, we were not best friends. No, I wouldn't even consider us close, but we were acquaintances, and he knew me more than he knew Evan. He met Evan through me. I've known James, like, at the end of the day, he knows me more than he knows Evan. So it's like, with that information, with what I told you, it should have been okay, I understand, and move on. There should not be a second part to this. It should have ended right there, and then none of this would have happened. There wouldn't be a drama. There wouldn't be a fucking, like, this wouldn't be a fucking drama if it ended where it should have. And in my opinion, if you have good morals, it would have ended there. I know people in my life that I have, like, am acquaintances with, and they would not do that to me, and I would not do that to them. I would not do this to people that I've even collabed with once. I wouldn't do that to somebody. So in my opinion, it should have ended there. And there should have been no communication between him and Evan past that point.
And yeah, that's absolutely right. Any normal thinking person with a regular human functioning brain would not see somebody say, yeah, my ex did the worst possible things to me, and think, oh, I'm going to pursue a friendship or even more with that person. You'd hear what your friend or acquaintance is saying to you and be like, wow, that's terrible. And dependent on your friendship level, you'd offer advice to them, you've offered to be there for them, but you definitely, regardless of if you're friends with them, a co-worker with them, or whatever with them, you would not, it's crazy to even say it, get the person to, or have the person, or they fly out to you, hang out with that person, and then see that person as a victim because you're obviously wanting to, you know, no sane person would do that. So I don't care how many times James Charles wants to claim to be manipulated in this situation or to be gaslit in this situation and victimizing himself in this situation. I'm sorry, but I've seen too many James Charles excuses over the years to believe any of this. Now, one commenter did actually state that they're not standing up for James in any way, shape, or form, but I get it if he didn't take her messages seriously. Her tone and emojis gave it a sarcastic tone, not super serious. James is also a flirt, not an excuse or okay whatsoever, but it is an explanation. Yes, it is still weird. And look, I'm going to have to obviously completely disagree with what is being said here, because personally, I don't understand how anyone can hear somebody say, this person did the worst things possible to me, and not take that as serious. Yes, there are some emojis in there. The tone can be interpreted in certain ways, but you can't interpret the worst things a person could do in any other way, also considering the fact that abuse was mentioned in the catalogue of messages and also a 30-part series. I'm sorry, but realistically, there's no tonal issues here in my personal opinion. To me personally, what this is a victim has been ignored once again because the person that did those terrible things was conventionally attractive. This is something that you see quite a lot in Hollywood, where somebody does something terrible, but they're allowed to continue in Hollywood because they're conventionally attractive. If they weren't handsome, if they weren't skinny, if they didn't have a six-pack, I'm pretty sure that James Charles would not be reaching out to them in the way he was. But unfortunately, he did, and now he's trying to lie his way out of it. But then after this, it only continues to get worse, where it appears, based on Kayla's words, that James actually put her in severe danger.
The day before I go live and say that I was in an abusive relationship, this was the day before I officially made it no contact and realized, holy shit, what, like, I wake up basically. So me and Evan have our final call. And this is when Evan says to me, if you tell people what I did to you, that means you never love me. That's when he said all of that on the phone. It was our last ever conversation. But in the beginning of that phone call, while we're talking, he brings up me making a 30-part series. And I immediately am like, how the do you know that? And he quote said a 30-part series. The only person that I texted about making a 30-part series was James. James was the only person I told about making a quote 30-part series. Once again, I don't know how true this is. He was abusive. He was like literally, like we all know by now. But Evan told me that James had sent him screenshots of our messages warning Evan that I was going to make a 30-part series. Once again, don't know how true that is, but it makes sense because on the phone, Evan literally said, so are you going to make that 30-part series about me? And in the text messages, once again, in the messages, I quite literally quote, tune in for the 30-part Who the Did I Marry series.
Now again, I should just say for legal reasons that there is no evidence to back these claims, which obviously would be difficult considering the recollection comes from a phone call with Evan Johnson. But if these things were to be true, obviously, this would most likely be the worst thing James has done in this situation. And to be honest with you, I'm inclined to believe her in this situation, given the fact that James himself admits that he at one point saw Evan as the victim. At one point, he was speaking to Evan about these things, getting to a point of where he could empathize with him and understand where he was coming from, and thought that they were pretty much on the same level of victimhood. I would not be surprised if what Kayla is saying here is true, just based on James's previous admissions. And that makes all of this so unbelievably worse. Imagine with whatever James said to Evan, with him learning things that he didn't know from Kayla's own mouth, imagine what he could have possibly done. This could have absolutely put Kayla in danger. Because what if Evan got to a point of where he learned about certain things and realized there's no getting out of this. There's no getting out of that jail sentence. There's no getting out of that jail cell. Imagine what he could have potentially done. Now, thankfully, obviously, Kayla had nothing else done to her after all of these horrific actions that happened in the past. But ultimately, with what is being spoken about here, it very much did seem that Kayla was absolutely at risk because of James's friendship with Evan. And I will just say, going ahead in the timeline, James has denied these types of claims. He's even gone to claim more times in the future that yes, he was manipulated by Evan Johnson, but at the end of the day, that doesn't excuse the fact that you had a friendship with the guy after knowing all of the things that you did. And to me personally, I think it's very clear that James knows he's in the wrong in this situation, but he is just doing everything to latch onto his career. And James's knowledge of being wrong in this situation is only proven further in Kayla's response when she starts to show text messages from James where he is blatantly lying about being with Evan.
I text him on March 1st saying, "This is so random. Hope you're doing good. Are you with Evan?" He says, "What? Your ex Evan?" Doesn't say yes, doesn't say no. I said, "Yes." Posted a picture, looked like your backyard. He goes, "Why would Evan be in my backyard?" Later to find out that he was in his backyard and that James had flown him out to California and they spent the entire weekend together. And honestly, if you knew you weren't doing anything wrong, why didn't you just straight up answer my question and say, "Yeah, he's here, we're friends"? And in James's video, he was saying that, "Oh, well, he seemed depressed and sad and like he needed a friend." I have a lot to say about that, but first thing, if you're just being there for a friend and that you think he's a good person, why do you feel the need to have to lie to me about it?
And this is exactly it. Why would you need to lie about your friendship with Evan Johnson if you believed that he was a good person? Based on these DMs of James blatantly lying, it's clear that he knew he had a reason to lie. He knew that what he was doing was wrong, hence he lied. He knew this whole thing was obviously terrible, and he knew if it got out, if Kayla found out about this, he would be in deep, deep trouble, which obviously happened because the general public at the time saw what was being said by Zach Sellers and realized that yes, this is a really, really bad thing, and once again, it's just James Charles being terrible. So in these texts, he's just trying to hopefully avoid any form of controversy by lying to Kayla. And honestly, if Zach Sellers never came out with his original posts about all of this, I really, really doubt that James would have ever said anything to either Kayla or to his TikTok followers. Because of course that starts to get into where James realized that his friendship with Evan could no longer continue. And it couldn't continue because of the ethical dilemma surrounding it. No, that wasn't a problem. The reason the friendship could not continue was because James realized that this was all going to get out there.
Fast forward another month. Me and James do not text. Nobody ever comes clean about anything. Nobody says anything, nothing. I release my "He Doesn't Love You" and I talk about everything that he had done to me. And me and James still are not talking. He still does not text me and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, doesn't try to explain himself, nothing." And in my opinion, that's because he didn't think he'd get caught. He didn't think I'd find out. So he had no reason to tell me firsthand. And that's why this really pisses me off. I end up texting James, asking to FaceTime for a segment on my podcast because Jacob had this funny idea that we were going to FaceTime James and James is going to be like, ew, Jacob, and then like hang up. It was supposed to be like this funny bit. I could include screenshots. Literally the next text a month later, after me asking if he had flown my ex-boyfriend out, I literally just say, hey, da-da-da, totally normal conversation. He does not bring it up, nothing. At this point, I don't have proof to back up my theory, so cool, whatever. But yeah, he doesn't say anything, acts like everything is normal. So then it is Coachella weekend, a couple weeks later, and a video is posted exposing James to have flown my ex-boyfriend out to California. The second that this video goes public, James starts to blow up my phone, asking if I'm at Coachella, saying that we need to talk. I immediately already knew what he was talking about. Are you at Coachella? Yeah, I am. Can I talk to you? I shut it down. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. He says, I felt guilty for weeks and I didn't know how to tell you and I owe the truth. I explained it to you from my mouth, not the Zach guy, and then you can feel however you want to. To me, it's quite ironic that you suddenly feel guilty about this the second that it's made public. You know what I mean? Like you suddenly feel guilty once, like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I text him, I've known for a while, but I saw the proof today. I'm just shocked. There's a ton to explain. I'm annoyed with myself for allowing you to find out this way instead of just telling you myself. I say, okay. He then says, he manipulated me as well, and I fell for it.
Now, I feel like this is another thing to add to the massive list of things that James Charles has done that are absolutely terrible. He states, he manipulated me as well, and I completely fell for it. Basically, what he's doing here is victimizing himself to a victim that he has lied to for months about hanging out with the person that made that person a victim. The sheer audacity to victimize yourself in this situation as an excuse to get out of valid criticism and being called out for your actions is truly and utterly despicable. And what's crazy is people have seen these texts and they still think that James Charles is in the right in this situation. They still say, oh, well, he wasn't friends with you. And it's like, just look at the text. He knows what he has done here is absolutely wrong. But yeah, just like James got away with the 16-year-olds, he obviously got away with this. Because then we get into Kayla's third part in the series, and pretty much this is just more of the same of Kayla basically explaining how betrayed she feels, and that she believes that she would not have gotten a public apology from James if this didn't all go public. But she does understand why James would want to counter possible slander out there that has been made against him, probably referencing the Be Better podcast, but overall that James has done something terrible and that she seems just pretty bewildered with how all of this has transpired. And to be honest with you, I think these three responses are absolutely great. I genuinely do think that these are probably the best things that have happened throughout the entire story because they provide a little context to do with the friendship that they had, they provide screenshots over some claims, and it just allows us to really understand what happened in this situation. But bizarrely enough, the audience reaction to this was pretty mixed. I mean, overall, I would say it's positive, but there were some weird and ridiculous comments like, I get her rage, but James Charles was not your friend. He didn't owe you anything. And when I saw this, I was just sat there reading this thinking to myself, are these bots? Are these people that just aren't real? Is this like the dead internet theory? Or it's just the average person on TikTok's critical thinking skills just in the mud completely? Like there is no reading comprehension, there is no critical thinking skills, and people on that app are just dumb. Because I don't know how you could hear Kayla's response and think that James is still somehow in the right because they weren't best friends. But now you're probably wondering, well, how did James respond to all of this? Because yeah, there were a large amount of claims, and as we've seen before, he has hit back hard against the previous ones. So what is he gonna say now? Well, James took to his Instagram stating, I watched Kayla's videos last night, and I'm grateful that she did not feed into the lies that she was told by Zach, while also expressing how I upset her. I said it in my original video, and I'll say it again. Kayla, I'm sorry that I was ever involved with this compulsive liar, and I'm even more sorry that my involvement hurt you. Again, he's trying to victimize himself in this response here by calling the person a compulsive liar. Now, yes, obviously Evan Johnson is a compulsive liar, but I really, in this context, don't think it's needed to victimize yourself to a victim that you've been lying to for months. He goes on to say she said in her video that she wasn't sure which stories from Evan were true, and there seems to be some confusion about my involvement before their breakup, and I want to make it clear, I absolutely did not pursue Evan or have a secret plot to take him from Kayla. I mean, we have seen the messages between Kayla and James in regards to Evan. He was definitely very interested in the guy. He goes on to say, as you will see, Evan reached out to me multiple times. I politely responded and then ended the conversation. I offered to privately share all of these messages directly with Kayla so she could see what actually happened, but now I will share them publicly to hopefully make it clear. And then he goes on to show messages, and in these messages, Evan and James are not flirting. It is just normal conversation, with Evan clearly originally reaching out to him, and to me, yeah, these messages aren't really the biggest deal in the world. But the problem is these messages are from the time period whilst Evan and Kayla were in a relationship. That's not the problem in the story. The problem is that Evan and James became friends after Kayla came out with her story to James and in an Instagram live stream. The problem was that Kayla told James that Evan did the worst possible things imaginable, and James decided to then pursue a friendship with the guy. If anything, these messages that James is providing actually make him look even worse, because it very much does show to us that yes, he did not have a connection to Evan Johnson before Kayla and Evan broke up. He had no reasons to pursue a friendship, yet he still turned his back on Kayla and pursued that friendship. James then finished off his response by stating, I'm happy that Kayla got her justice for what Evan put her through, and like she said, she deserves to celebrate. I genuinely wish her the best and pray that she continues to win, with her abuser staying behind bars. And look, in my personal opinion, I think this response is absolute garbage. If anything, it weirdly tries to shape Kayla's response to James and everything going on in like a positive lie by saying that Kayla wasn't feeding into the lies that Zach was saying, but honestly, Kayla barely actually references Zach at all in her 3-part response. All of the response was basically her criticizing James Charles, yet he's come onto his multi-million followed Instagram to state that I'm glad she didn't feed into the lies and shaped it out to be like this lovely public response that Kayla gave. The reality is Kayla clearly was against James Charles and was not happy with James Charles, yet James was desperately trying to change the narrative, in my opinion. But yeah, it was very clear Kayla was not happy with this response, as she uploaded a very short response to the response on her TikTok page, where pretty much, in my opinion, she's insinuating that there have been deleted or vanished messages.
Hey Instagram, can we get rid of vanish mode? Can we get rid of that? Can we just go in the little... Can we get rid of that? I'm gonna go crazy.
Now, obviously, what this is in reference to is James displaying very minimal DMs and kind of trying to present that as his entire friendship with Evan Johnson. But the reality is these guys hung out in person. James himself has told us that he spoke to Evan Johnson. He felt bad for Evan Johnson and thought he was the victim. So clearly, they had a large amount of conversations. And I don't think all of these conversations took place over Instagram. I think a lot of them would have took place over iMessage, WhatsApp, maybe Snapchat even. We've seen James Charles absolutely love Snapchat, so I really don't doubt that there are more messages out there between Evan and James. But since this response, the whole situation has pretty much ended there. Now, since then, Kayla has gone on to Tana Mojo's podcast to speak about this whole situation, to speak about her experiences with Evan Johnson. But overall, in terms of the community sentiment, I feel like a lot of people have now moved on to the next thing. And this is yet again, as I said at the beginning of the video, another thing swept under the carpet of James Charles, which I think was just a masterful tactic from him. I think James absolutely knew what he was doing in all of his responses in this situation. James probably is the most PR trained person that there possibly is at this point when it comes to public relations. Obviously, when it's private and behind the scenes, he's absolutely a menace. But in general, the public perception of James Charles right now is seemingly overwhelmingly positive. And I really just don't understand it. James is back to getting millions upon millions of views. He's launching new products and probably making even more money. And even influencers like Jaclyn Hill are still supporting him no matter what, despite everything we've gone through today. And to kind of summarize all of this, yes, this story is a story of nuance. Ultimately, Kayla Malec is the victim in this situation. But don't get it twisted. James Charles is not a victim of Evan Johnson. James Charles knew what he was doing. We've seen enough evidence and screenshots to show that. And also, yes, other individuals in this story, like Zach Sellers, have absolutely used this story to their advantage, but that does not mean their original message was not true. But sadly, because James Charles' TikTok audience has the critical thinking skills of a goldfish, it's just yet again another thing this man has gotten away with. And it just blows my mind that after years of apologies and taking accountability, people still believe and trust this guy. I mean, let's not forget the fact that this guy literally uploaded a video called Taking Accountability, and he deleted that video and someone had to re-upload it. This is the same individual that people are taking at his word and believing everything he has to say. He even then redid the video and tried to make things look better in a video titled An Open Conversation. But the reality was that James was messaging 16-year-olds. Regardless of what he says, regardless of his arguments, there is no justification for that, yet James has still masterfully gotten away with everything over the years. And people like to say to me that cancel culture exists. I think, honestly, to kind of conclude and summarize everything today, James Charles is walking proof and evidence that cancel culture does not exist. And the fact of the matter is if it did exist, then everyone other than James that I've spoken about in this video today would have never ever associated with James after this happened. The fact is, so many influencers and celebrities and corporations are still actively associated with this guy. So there even is criticism directed towards Kayla in this aspect, because I don't understand, after everything, how this man gets away with so much. To conclude this story, I think we can completely collectively agree, based on all of the context that we've gone through in this very, very long video today, that James Charles, once again, shock horror, is absolutely in the wrong. I've seen people say that Kayla Malec is dragging out this story, she's doing too much, but the reality is she has the full right to speak about this story for as long as she wants. And I think it's kind of sickening that TikTok just manages to run to the next thing and to the next thing and to the next thing and just forget whatever we were talking about last month, because it just allows James Charles to get away with everything that he has gotten away with over the years. And overall, I'll end this video by pointing you to a previous video I made about James, where it goes over the fact that James Charles has gotten away with so much for years and how he managed to do so. It's very similar to this video, but it is in regards to his 16-year-old situation. But with that, I'll see you in the next video. Please let me know your thoughts down below. Please like this video. And yeah, just in general, I would appreciate it if you supported the video, because I got my last video age restricted, and I would be very sad if that happened on a video that's taken this much effort and time into it. I understand that this situation is kind of old now, but ultimately, I just don't think that we should forget these things like we have forgotten everything else to do with James Charles. But with that, I'll leave you, and yeah, have a good weekend, everybody. Peace out. Bye-bye.